And now, Mr. O'Leary, I'd like to invite you to make your opening statement. Go ahead.
Thank you, Cathaoirleach. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. Pleasure to be back here with the committee. I'm joined today by Jason McGuinness, who's Ryanair's Chief Commercial Officer, and Eoghan Keeley, who's our Director of Regulatory Affairs. We think it's timely, and with your permission, we have a couple of very brief slides, which I think is an easier way than submitting a written presentation, setting out where the issues are with the traffic cap at Dublin Airport, which is heavily constraining our traffic growth at Dublin, and also at Cork, Shannon, and in the rest of the country. So just to touch base, we are Europe's largest airline this year, and we're also Europe's fastest growing airline. This year we're going to grow by about another 16 million passengers, from 184 million passengers last year to 200 million passengers this year. The tragedy in Ireland is none of that 16 million passenger growth is coming to Ireland. The cap at Dublin Airport is forcing us to send aircraft, jobs, routes and traffic overseas. If you go forward to the next slide, or can I move these slides? Do I need some? Oh, okay. So this are what we're doing this summer. We're operating from 95 bases. We're serving 40 countries. And as I said, not alone are we going to carry 200 million passengers this year, but we have very exciting plans to take delivery of about 300 new aircraft and grow to 300 million passengers over the next 8 years. And again, unless that traffic cap is moved at Dublin Airport, none of that growth will be coming to Ireland. And we want, because we're based here, it has always been our policy to deliver growth in routes, traffic and jobs here in Ireland. But at the moment, we're being impeded from doing so. Next slide. Post-COVID, we are the only airline in Europe that has recovered, that has grown significantly. Our traffic is up 35%. Pre-COVID, we were carrying 150 million passengers. As I said, this year, 200 million passengers. Despite the challenges of Boeing air delivery delays, higher priced fuel and a war in Ukraine and the Middle East. We are making very strong market share gains across the EU, except in Ireland. In Portugal, in Italy, in Spain, in Poland, etc. Ryanair is now the #1 airline in all of those major markets. The aircraft that were lost at Dublin this year have gone to Copenhagen, to Morocco, to Jordan and to Albania as we expand into new countries and new markets that we didn't serve before. And the tragedy of all of this is that from an environmental point of view, all of this growth is taking place on new aircraft that carry 20% more passengers, burn 20% less fuel and are 50% quieter than our existing fleet of aircraft. So this is growth that is environmentally friendly, sustainable, and I know we'll have some Fingal deputies in the room, dramatically quieter than our existing aircraft, and yet we're exporting all this growth to other countries around Europe who frankly are laughing at the failure of Ireland's aviation policy. And what I fail to understand here is we are capped at Dublin at 32 million passengers a year, despite having just opened a second runway at a cost of some 300 million euros, which gives Dublin Airport the capacity to handle 60 million passengers a year. So we basically opened up a second runway, but we're now told we can't use it. And yet we have the Green Ministers for Transport and for Tourism, and we are trying to encourage them to adopt these growth policies on environmentally efficient aircraft, and we can't get a reply to our growth proposals. In Ireland in 2024, and we do it on an all-Ireland basis, we fly to 7 airports. We have 4 bases. We have new base open up in Belfast, but in the Republic of Ireland, we are delivering, sadly, no growth because of the cap at Dublin Airport. And just to touch briefly on Dublin. So Dublin this year, the traffic cap of 32 million, that cap was imposed by On Board Planol in 2007, at a time when they opened the second terminal. The concern at that stage was that the roads around Dublin Airport would become blocked and choked because there was no public infrastructure for getting people to Dublin Airport. The Dublin Metro was going to come and rescue us all. The Dublin Metro, I will be dead by the time the Dublin Metro finally gets here, if it ever gets to Dublin Airport. Nevertheless, Dublin Airport's traffic has doubled from 2007 to 2024, but more than 20% of that passengers are now coming by bus. public transport, bus connections to and from the airport is solving the problem which was at the heart of this concern back in 2007. We do not need a traffic cap. There is not a road access crisis at Dublin Airport. And sadly, the DAA, who continue to mismanage the airport, have had 17 years to apply for a planning exemption to get this cap, this artificial cap lifted. They haven't done so. It quite suits the DAA to say we're full at the moment. They're putting up their fees by 45% over the next 4 years to 2026. So 23, 24, 25 and 26. The passenger charges at Dublin Airport are going up by 45%. Dublin Airport will not open additional car parking around Dublin Airport. They keep misleading the public that, oh, if they could only buy somebody else's car park, all would be well. Dublin Airport owns over 150 acres of land around Dublin Airport. You could, at an instant, open any of those fields, as many show during the summer, and create low-cost parking solutions. Or you could put tarmac some of those fields, you don't need planning permission to do it, and simply create additional car parking. But the DAA wants to increase airport fees, it wants to constrain car parking and increase parking charges. And it is what we call regulatory gaming. The most egregious example of which currently is they are planning to build a four-lane tunnel, the equivalent of a Dublin Port tunnel, under a taxiway at Dublin Airport, going out to the West Apron. There is nothing on the West Apron. It is simply a way of them spending another 250 million so they can go back into the regulator and ask them to increase the fees again. So the DAA are using these artificial constraints, the traffic cap, which is a planning constraint, the car parking, which is a constraint of entirely their own making, to inflate charges, and then they're going to blow 250 million at a time when we need more gates and more facilities in the terminal buildings. They want to build a tunnel to nowhere so they can explain to the regulator we have to spend all this money on new facilities, please give us higher charges again. Critical to this is we've just opened a second runway at Dublin Airport. We have runway capacity for 60 million passengers. And yet the day we open it, the planning, 2007 planning rule says we can't use it. There is going to be a critical issue, and I would urge all the politicians here, there is going to be a massive crisis here this Christmas. Well, I'll come on to it, because we have applied for all our slots for this winter, including the extra slots that we routinely run for extra flights in the October school midterm, Christmas, Cheltenham, the rugby internationals. We didn't get any of those extra flights because we're up at the traffic cap. The fares to and from Dublin this Christmas will be probably €500 one way, about €1,000 return. And the government and politicians are going to get the blame for it. Suits me fine. I mean, if you cap Dublin Airport, we'll make out like bandits. I'll make a fortune this Christmas. Airlines are traditionally criticised that, well, you just put up all your fares at Christmas. We don't actually, but because we're busy, all the inbound fares to Dublin are high, but we keep them down by adding 270,000 extra flights. This is our winter 2020, sorry, it should be winter 24 capacity. So we've applied in the normal event for our normal winter schedule, which is the 7-day-a-week schedule. That's 6.4 million seats. That's approved. We've also applied, as we do every winter, for 90,000 extra seats for the October school midterm, 270,000 extra seats for the Christmas uplift, 7,000 extra seats for the Six Nations, St. Patrick's Day next March, 130,000 seats, Cheltenham, 10,000 seats, and Premier League extra 7,000 seats. They've all been rejected because we're up against the planning cap. And so fares for our families reuniting at Christmas, people coming home here at Christmas, are going to double and triple. You're looking at 500 one-way fares, €1,000 return fares to Dublin, unless the government moves to fix this cap. Some of these, we can move some of these extra flights up to Belfast, and somebody's going to say, why can't they go to Shannon and why can't they go to Cork? Because the inbound passengers do not want to go to Shannon or to Cork. The cap is also limiting Ireland Inc.'s growth. I thought at this point in time, I met with the Transport Minister and our offices on the 7th of March. We put in front of him the most ambitious traffic and tourism growth initiative that this country has ever seen. We gave him a plan where over the next 6 years, from 2024 to 2030, we would grow Dublin from 15 million passengers, this is Ryanair on our own, 15 million passengers to 20 million passengers, so about 33% growth. Cork, we would increase the number of based aircraft from 3 to 7 aircraft and grow from 2 to 4.5 million passengers. Shannon, we would grow from 3 to 6 based aircraft and take traffic in Shannon from 1.3 to 3 million passengers. And Knock, where we think there's a potential in the next year or two to open a base, 2 aircraft, doubling Knock's traffic from 700,000 to 1.5 million. In total, Ireland, if we lift the cap at Dublin Airport, Ryanair is willing to grow and invest 50% traffic growth from 20 to 30 million passengers over the next 6 years. Sadly, we haven't yet got a reply from the Transport Minister to that submission on the 7th of March. We have had no reply, no action, and no movement on the cap. And I am somewhat using the good offices of this committee to raise this issue and call for urgent action. We need a fix to this cap. It will get lifted, but the problem is the planning process is going to take 3 or 4 years to fix. Just to give you briefly what Dublin Airport are planning to spend 250 million on, here's where the tunnel is going to go, under the taxiway between the 2 runways. It is Pier D, which is where we are, is on the eastern apron, and they are building a port tunnel, 2 lanes either way, 2 lanes both ways underneath the taxiway. Presently, you can drive across that taxiway. The only thing that's on the left-hand side of that slide is the fire department, and they park up cargo planes and private aircraft. Now, the parcels and the rich can drive across the taxiway, or they can drive around the runways if needs be. But my passengers and your constituents do not need to be paying higher fares, so that we can ferry the parcels and the few rich rich executives in under a 4-lane tunnel under a taxiway. When currently in Cologne Bonn you can drive across the taxiway, they can drive across this taxiway as well. But this is the kind of mismanagement that goes on at Dublin Airport. They haven't addressed a planning issue for 17 years because they were too busy designing a port tunnel to go under a taxiway that isn't necessary, and none of the airlines wish to pay for it. So in conclusion, we have Irish tourism needs action. Dublin Airport, and I know we're going to get into some of the Fingal issues, is a national gateway for Ireland. It is not a Fingal planning issue. It is not a local issue that to be determined by people in Fingal. The government should lead. It should not follow Fingal County Council, or, with the greatest respect, a couple of NIMBYs in North County Dublin. And to demonstrate what I'm talking about here, last year there was 26,000 noise complaints submitted to Dublin Airport. 24,500 of those came from one person. 90% of the noise complaints, 26,000, came from one person. Now, he's entitled to his view, but really he shouldn't be allowed to constrain the growth of traffic, tourism and jobs on an island in the periphery of Europe. We have Eoghan Keeley here. There are 2 simple legal mechanisms that can be used to scrap this airport cap. The Transport Minister can take action, or the Housing Minister, who has powers under various legislation to issue to expedite the lifting of this cap while the planning process takes its course. Scrap the 250 million tunnel to nowhere. We don't need it. I would call on Dublin Airport to use that money to expand the terminals, expand the gates, and above all, expand the car parks now, this summer or for next summer. So you stop telling people the car parks are full and putting up the charges. Build more car parking. They own enough land around Dublin Airport. Use it. Lower the Dublin charges, and they should. Interestingly, the DA have had their charges regime rejected by asked the IAF to go back and look at it, because their environmental incentive scheme doesn't work. In actual fact, it penalises the most efficient environmental aircraft, which are our new Boeing 737-8200s, and we've now sent those overseas so that we are operating the slightly older, smaller, slightly noisier aircraft at Dublin, because the environmental incentive actually penalises greener aircraft. Ireland needs tourism, Ireland needs jobs, we need low-fare access, we do not need traffic caps, and we need the government to take urgent action quickly now. Can I just finish on one concluding point? We have a national aviation policy. there has three pillars to national aviation policy. One, to enhance Ireland's connectivity and competitive access. You can't do that with a 32 million passenger cap. Two, we will foster the growth of aviation enterprise to support job creation and to position Ireland as a recognised global leader in aviation. Nobody in Europe thinks Ireland's a global leader in aviation. They're all laughing at us because we're exporting all these aircraft and these jobs to other European countries because Dublin says it's full, we can't take any more. And three, to maximise the contribution of the aviation sector to Ireland's economic growth and development. We can and we will invest and develop, add more economic growth and development, but we can't do it while Dublin Airport has a cap. Can I just, before I do, Owen, we just get detail very briefly the two legal mechanisms that we believe that can be dealt with to address this cap while the planning process.
Thanks, Michael, and thanks to the committee for their time. As Michael said, we've identified two legislative solutions the government can act on right away to fix this cap. The quickest, easiest, most efficient solution to this is for the Minister for Transport to now move emergency legislation to amend the Planning and Development Act to scrap the passenger cap. He could do this right away. Now is actually the perfect time because there's a Planning and Development Bill before the Dáil. There's 800 plus amendments made to the Planning and Development Act. Add one more now. It's been pushed through, I understand, very, very quickly through the Dáil. Add one more amendment to scrap the cap and get the bill passed. So now is actually the perfect time. The second option, and this can be pursued at the same time, the Minister for Housing and Local Government can use the Planning and Development Strategic Infrastructure Act 2006 to make airports strategic infrastructure and issue a ministerial direction to An Bord Pleanála to scrap the passenger cap. We know this issue is going to come before An Bord Pleanála at some point, so issue the direction now so when An Bord Pleanála gets this on its desk, it can act right away as soon as it hits the desk to scrap the cap. So there's two immediate solutions that the government can pursue at this point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you both very much. That concludes your presentation, yeah?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. We'll now move to members. And thank you for that very informative presentation. And I think we did, well, as a committee, want to bring you in because it was being talked about on the radio, the Minister, yourself, Claire Byrne, the newspapers, we're all talking about it, and we felt that it was important that we would air the issue here. And thank you very much for your invitation. We also invited Aer Lingus, but they're not in a position to attend at the moment, so that's their prerogative. We have a speaking roster, and the first person who's here on that roster is Deputy Cathal Crowe. Go ahead.
Just to welcome our guests here today from Ryanair and to congratulate you on the onward and upward growth of your company. Just a few points I want to hone in on. First of all, the planning cap. We are aware of other European countries where there's environmental noise output caps. Is the planning cap on passenger numbers unique to Ireland, and have you encountered this in any other countries, and have you had to fight battle in other countries and other jurisdictions to get beyond this?
Yeah. No. Yes, the planning cap based on a road access restriction is unique to Ireland. In fact, it's unique to Dublin. There are noise regulations operating at most European airports now. Most noise regulations, though, measure noise. What we have is we have this blunt instrument that says there will be, we limit it to 65 nighttime flights. Nighttime is defined as midnight to 7 a.m. That is not. At a time when aircraft today are 50% quieter than they were 10 years ago, a number of flights is completely ineffective. It doesn't do anything to either to reduce noise. What Dublin and what the airlines have been calling for many years, as has Dublin Airport to be fair, is to measure noise. As aircraft get quieter, we do believe that definition of nighttime should be moved from midnight to 6:30, not 7. The reason for that is that most of our first wave departures take place before 7 a.m, after 6:30 and before 7. But Dublin is the only airport that has a 17-year-old planning restriction that relates to road access to and from the airport.
Can I next ask, I think there's merit to your two legislative proposals that you're suggesting, but I'm also conscious that the last time we had the Dublin Airport Authority in here, they were lodging planning that week, and then they advised us that it could take 2 years minimum for that to go through the whole process, because there's inevitably going to be an An Bord Pleanála appeal, possibly a judicial review. You have a lot of residents, they contact our committee. There's going to be a long campaign here, I think, and both of the suggestions you've made, although they technically could happen with some relative ease in the House of the Oireachtas. It only provides a framework from Bord Pleanála to move this further along. You could still be locked in a 2-year cycle potentially of this capping. Have you considered that, and has that been in your talks with Minister and DA, that no matter what you say here today, it could be 2 years or more before a cap is lifted?
Well, we do. Firstly, it won't be 2. We think it's going to be 4. There is absolutely no question that whatever decision around Bord Pleanála make will be appealed. There will be High Court judicial review. It will be 4 years before this gets fixed. And I don't believe we can have a credible transport minister, a credible transport policy, an aviation policy that is hijacked by a local planning issue for the next 4 years. There are 2 immediate instruments that can be used by both the transport minister and or by the housing minister. And what we would be calling for, Dublin Airport is a piece of national infrastructure. While the planning permission is got, we have to have a measure that says we can raise or ignore, suspend the cap while this planning application is taking 4 years. Nobody believes Dublin Airport at the end of the planning is going to be restricted to 32 million passengers a year.
With inaction, you fear it's 4 years that you'll be subjected to this cap.
Ireland will be subjected to this cap.
Okay.
We'll keep growing. It's just we won't be growing in Ireland.
But the passengers and those who wish to use the service. Okay.
And that will mean materially higher airfares for passengers.
I next want to ask you, the last day we had Dublin Airport Authority in here, I was quite critical of their approach. I feel, and I'm sure you're going to disagree with me, I feel that they've gotten ahead of government on this because we have a national aviation strategy policy review to happen this year. They come in with a planning permission. They're semi-state. I think they've gazumped the government in some ways. They come in with a planning application for expansion and a whole remodification of Dublin Airport and indeed Cork at a time when we're preparing to review aviation overall in the island. Now, if you were to go back to scratch and start all of this again, you may not have 5 airports on the western shore and 1 on the east. But look, it is what it is. But do you feel that DA have been getting ahead of government, but also getting ahead of Ryanair on this?
I mean, to be fair, no. I mean, I don't think they're getting ahead of government. The DA are doing what the DA always do. They're feathering their own nests. I mean, their traffic is capped here. It's the DA's fault that this traffic is capped. The DA should have applied for this planning application 5, 10 years ago and had it lifted. As usual, there was inaction. But if their airport and their traffic is capped for the next 4 years, say nothing can be done in the next 4 years, traffic is capped at 32 million passengers a year. Why is your primary plan to spend 250 million building a tunnel under going nowhere? I mean, if your traffic is genuinely capped for the next 4 years, stop wasting money on facilities like a tunnel that none of the airlines at Dublin Airport support. You should be trying to expand some of the gate facilities and some of the customer-facing facilities within the terminal building, and it is a dereliction of the DA's management that they haven't expanded car parking availability at Dublin Airport from last summer to this summer.
Isn't it somewhat absurd that you need to fully expand Dublin in order to take in more passengers, and yet without putting an extra brick, piece of steel or piece of glass into Shannon or Cork, Shannon in particular can double its passenger count without changing anything? It's already configured for that. Isn't it somewhat wasteful, unsustainable? And could you play a role perhaps in providing new routes in and out of Shannon?
We've already offered. I mean, we've made the submission to the Transport Minister on the 7th of March. We've given him a submission that would take traffic growth at Shannon would go up by 50% over the next 6 years. Traffic in Cork would go up by 100% in the next the traffic. But unless we're growing at Dublin, we will not be able to sustain or put in more aircraft and more routes at Cork, Shannon and Knock. We have to be growing both sides of the country.
I next ask Mr. O'Leary, we spoke with this before the meeting, but Ryanair have some fabulous route offerings to Spain, but it just seems to be the German market is somewhat lacking. It's well served maybe out of Dublin, but not so out of Shannon. And yet when we repeatedly look at our tourism figures along the west of Ireland, German tourists are coming to the west of Ireland for hiking, for angling, to spend a slow moving holiday along the west of Ireland, up along the Wild Atlantic Way. Are you considering any German or Dutch routes in or out of Shannon?
No, but there's a particular problem with the German market. The German market is the least recovered market post-COVID. While Ireland has already fully recovered its pre-COVID traffic, Germany is only operating at 80% of its pre-COVID traffic. During the emerging out of COVID, Lufthansa got rid of a lot, closed down some of its own airlines, eliminated some of the competition. The German government have doubled ATC fees in Germany. They're now the most expensive in Europe, and the German airports have a legislative framework that doesn't allow them to discount for new route growth. So they have to say the same published charges, and if you have the same published charges, one, you won't deliver growth, and two, we couldn't afford and can't afford new routes that will be marginal at best from Germany to the west of Ireland. We do fly from Frankfurt-Hahn to Shannon. I think we've one from Tranmere into Kerry as well in the peak summer months. So there is access there, but it is very high cost and loss making because of the high costs of infrastructure in Germany at the moment.
And can I ask next, when I look at the Ryanair route map, your reach into Europe is extending, as you said yourself, and some of your routes now are up to 4.5, 5 hours long. And surely that then beggars the question, is it time for Ryanair to now start looking transatlantic? You had a plan before, you scrapped that plan, and maybe it's not on the horizon, but surely upstate New York, some of those airports that would offer cheap landing fees, it would make it very attractive. And you could exploit that pre-clearance that's offered both out of Shannon and Dublin, making it very viable for the European traveller to go from Frankfurt-Hahn or Charleroi Airport, touch down in Ireland and head on to the United States. Has that been looked at, or is it being looked at?
It's not, for again the same reason. There's no transatlantic growth out of Dublin while the traffic cap remains in place for the next 2, 3, 4 years. There are other American airlines who want to expand here in Dublin, can't get slots in the same way we can't get Christmas slots here. Narrow body, what we do very well in Europe is short haul, quick turnaround and short haul flights. It doesn't work on transatlantic. Norwegian and others have tried to do long haul low fares. It really doesn't work because the premium traffic, which wants to go from Heathrow or Dublin to JFK, will not relocate to going to Rhode Island or somewhere else. And that premium traffic pays for the entire aircraft. But it's a moot point while we still have this traffic cap at Dublin Airport, and while, regrettably, the Minister for Transport won't reply to our traffic growth proposals. If we can't persuade him that we want to grow by 50% on short-haul routes to Europe, there's not much point in sending in a plan to enter the transatlantic market either.
And can I just finally put it to you that, of course, the Minister should reply, and I think I certainly will, I'm sure their government colleagues will as well. That needs, you certainly need a response. That can't be just left hanging there. Can I just finally put it to you respectfully that is part of Ryanair's problem today that Ryanair have changed their business model, because there was a time, take Belgium for example, you didn't always fly into the capital city, Brussels, you did fly into Charleroi, and when you did fly into Charleroi it was called Brussels South Charleroi. And why is it that the other airports of Ireland, if you're capped and limited by what can fly in and out of Dublin, surely some of your answer immediately, not to wait 4 years for Eamon Ryan or someone to react to this, but surely the immediate answer for this season, the shoulder season, winter and beyond, is to look at that capacity in Shannon and Cork, where things are cheaper, where the car park's cheaper, where the experience is quicker, and it's only 2 miles on, two hours down the motorway. You were very willing in the past to do this with the likes of Charleroi, just being one example, and there are dozens of others. Surely the model of old served you so well, and surely it can serve you really well applying it to Ireland in this case, and certainly the likes of Shannon.
It's already serving us. I mean, we are growing in Shannon, we are growing in Cork. You know, Shannon 4 or 5 years ago had, well, maybe 8 or 9 years ago, had almost no traffic. It was on. You know, we're now the biggest airline in Shannon. We're the biggest airline in Cork. We have 3 aircraft based in. Got the numbers. 3 aircraft based in Cork and 3 aircraft based in Shannon.
Could you flip it so that you arrive in the west of Ireland and you day trip to the east, and you surely that model can be explored, and it'd be very cheap.
There's a very interesting analysis that we hear trotted out quite a lot. This, well, if you can't get to Dublin, why don't you just? We should move all the passengers to Cork and Shannon, or to Shannon and Cork and Shannon. 65% of the traffic on our routes is inbound. The vast majority, in fact the overwhelming majority of that traffic, wants to go to Dublin. Now some will go on to Shannon and some will go on to Cork. There are limited markets where they want to get access to the west of Ireland, and we are serving that and growing those markets through Cork, through Shannon and even through Knock. although we've now discovered a new market in Knock where we're taking people outbound on summer holidays to Faro and the Canaries, but only for about 2 months of the year. The market is inbound, and we have to keep growing that inbound market so that we can sustain our new routes, our more capacity and new aircraft here going outbound as well.
But surely there's not 200 people from Faro visiting Knock.
No,
they're returning people.
Most of those are people from Roscommon and Mayo and Sligo heading for Faro.
But the return flight very often is people coming home from that same trip. It's not people from the south of Portugal deciding they're going to have a lovely holiday in Mayo for the summer.
Yep.
Much as we'd like them to, that isn't always the case. So the return flight invariably fills. And anyone who goes on a sun holiday, the same 120 people are facing the way back. You're going out on the Friday, they're coming back on the Friday. So surely, even on a weekly basis, some of those routes should be viable to move down to the rest of the country.
I mean, we're already serving those routes that are viable. We're growing in Cork and in Shannon, but we can't magic up a route, as you rightly say. Say we have 7 aircraft or 9 aircraft this summer in Faro. There's no point just trying to put a route from Faro back into Shannon. There's nobody. You're right. All the traffic for that is going southwards. Growth in these markets and this kind of traffic growth takes time and it takes significant investment. I mean, each of those aircraft in Shannon and Cork, and there's 3 in both, is $100 million piece of kit. We have other markets around Europe. Like if you tell us, as the Minister said, Dublin is full and we can't get any additional slots, the alternative is not move the aircraft to Shannon or Cork, much as we would like to. Those are thin and difficult markets. The alternative is we move those aircraft to, it could be to Amsterdam, it could be to Manchester, it could be to Glasgow. Bristol is a city of 10 million people. The aircraft will be lost to Ireland. Some will go to Belfast. I mean, we have a 2 aircraft base in Belfast, and we think we can resolve some of the pressure this Christmas with our returning emigrants coming home for Christmas. But they'll be coming home via Belfast. Now, it's not the worst option in the world.
So some people may not get home if this cap isn't lifted.
Some people will not be. I mean, they will not be able to afford to come home this, or they will be. We will be going back to the 1970s when they're going back. They'll be coming home on ferries. Subject plus or minus the weather. Yeah. And all of this is removable in an instant if the Minister will simply move to lift the cap, scrap the cap.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. It's removable, probably not in an instant, but thank you for your time. I may come in again later. Thanks, Chairman.
Thanks, Deputy Crowe. Deputy Farrell taking the slot of Senator Doherty. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. O'Leary and others. Thanks very much for coming before us. Your usual enigmatic appearance, thank you for that. I compliment you on the success of your business, and there's no doubt we have a lot to be grateful for in relation to what Ryanair has done to the airline market in Ireland over the last number of decades. I don't have the liberty of setting aside stuff that I know for the purposes of presenting to an Oireachtas committee, and I do feel it necessary to put some information into the room for the purposes of thrashing out some of the things that we agree on. For example, the first thing you said that I agreed with is that this is firmly at the feet of DAA in relation to the mismanagement of the airport. Of that, I am entirely in agreement with you. And I've stated on a number of occasions that they have had 17 years to plan for the growth of the airport, failed to do so and came up with an alternative plan at the last minute. But it should be said that ANCA, the aircraft noise regulator, has already sided with your views, Mr. O'Leary, in August of 2022 when they removed the flight cap, the night cap, and replaced it with the noise quota system. And also moved the 7 a.m. to 6 a.m. However, that's under appeal. Now, that process will take its course, and that is outside of the control of the Oireachtas. What I do want to stress, though, is that the infrastructural items that you mentioned at the airport, whatever about an underground tunnel, the application that's been put before Fingal County Council, which is, I think, 7,500 pages long. I'm sure that there are people in your organisation who've had the time to go through it. I'm not one of them, and I haven't. But I do know that there are piers and gates included in that application. It is unfortunate, as I've already stated, that it has taken DAA 17 years to get it together long enough to put in the planning application to cater for the expansion that is required. And another matter that I will agree with you with, Mr. O'Leary, is that the passenger cap is a blunt instrument and it's not appropriate. I don't care how many passengers come in and out of Dublin Airport. What I care about is aircraft movements, because they are the things that impact my constituents, but they're also the thing that benefit the entire nation because it results in lower fares. But I do want to question a couple of things that you've said. You've mentioned in the terminology that you used, you said aircraft lost to Dublin. I don't believe that any aircraft have been lost to Dublin. Rather, that there has been no growth by your airline at the airport. Is that a factual statement?
No, there were 4 aircraft planned. We were adding 4 aircraft to Dublin in summer of 2024. Those 4 aircraft have now been sent as a result of the cap. 3 have gone to southern Italy and 1 has gone to Poland.
Okay, but they weren't. Were they in service last summer?
No, this was
so
growth.
They're not lost. They're just foregone.
Well, I mean, I'm sure what the difference between lost and foregone is, but we will be delivering an extra 1 million passengers at Dublin Airport over the next 12 months, and we had planned 16 new routes from Dublin, and those are not taking place. Those aircraft and those routes have gone to southern Italy and to Poland.
Okay. And when you mentioned the 514,000 seats that you have written to the Minister about, could you tell or inform the committee as to your understanding of of an outline of the regulatory arrangement that the Minister presides over when you're looking to expand with new slots and destinations? What's the process? How do you apply in a scenario where there was no cap? How do you go about applying for that?
I'll give you my understanding and then I'm sure I'll be corrected. We have to apply on a seasonal basis each summer, each winter to the IAA, which is the regulator for slots, even before there was a cap. So we would apply as we have done for this winter, and that's why I set up there. So we have the 6.4 million, which is the historic slots we operated last year. We also applied for the other 570,000 extra slots. We operated those extra slots last year. So on a historic basis, we should be getting those slots. But the way the IAA are operating the slots now is they're saying, no, we're sorry. Because they allowed some additional slots this summer, we have to cut back the slots this winter, and we have been denied those slots for those extra flights and the October midterm break, Christmas, that kind of stuff. And that's the way the slot process is operating. Whether there was a cap or not, we would still have to apply. We had an issue with the Minister about 2 weeks ago for the European soccer final here. Yes. We applied for about 16 extra flights because nobody knew who was in the final until about 2 weeks beforehand. And they came from Italy and from Germany. And we applied in the normal way for those extra slots. We didn't get the slots. Now, and to be fair, I wrote to the Minister for Transport, and I want to thank him. The DA wouldn't issue the slots for these 16 extra flights. He intervened and the slots got issued later on that day. So that got solved. But that's not capable of being solved when you're looking for 270,000 extra seats this Christmas because we will be up above the cap.
Because of the IAA's regulatory
and
decision.
It's the IAA who can be instructed by the Minister.
So I understand. Well, no, the Minister can't instruct the IAA in that way, but it's slightly more nuanced than that. But I understand the point that you're making. But the point I was asking a question about your understanding of the way it works, because writing to the Minister, you'll understand I'm in politics 20 years as of yesterday, and I understand that that's a political move rather than a regulatory move. And it sounds great in an Oireachtas committee, and I'm not defending Eamon Ryan, he's not my party, albeit I'm a supportive member of government. But my view would be that, Mr. O'Leary, this is not your first rodeo, you've been here before. Writing to the Minister, informing him of slots or flights foregone and 514,000 passenger numbers foregone is absolutely newsworthy and absolutely worth writing to the Minister about. But I cannot help but feel that, if there's a process in place, a regulatory process that you as an airline group chief executive officer adhere to, it's to go through the IAA and the usual planning process, which I know you've done, but I just want to make the point that there are 2 things going on before this committee. One is an example of the strength of your airline, which is of course notable and welcome, and then the other is the politics. And as a committee, I think our role is a little bit of both as well. But for the purposes of exploring the question that is underneath on the caption on the screen behind me, and that is whether the impacts of the passenger cap, flights foregone are clearly central to that. But there are other considerations to be had as well. For instance, the planning process that we are now in, and there are, to my knowledge, at least 2, possibly 3 planning processes underway at the moment. The statutory requirements of the independent aircraft noise regulator also has to be considered. And in fact, it is they who will most likely provide for the longest delay in this planning process, even if the planning decision by Fingal County Council is made in the next 18 months. It'll then go to Bord Pleanála and ultimately end up in the courts. I would be of that view, as I think you are. But it's the noise impact assessment that will also take a very considerable period of time. There's 2 noise impact assessments going on at the moment, as you probably know, one on the use of the North Runway and 2 on the potential impact of removing the passenger cap. So would you like to offer a comment on that, or perhaps Mr. Keeley? I think he was indicating or moving towards the microphone.
No, I was just going to say on the IAA side, the passenger cap is the kind of original sin here. The IAA are part of the process around slot allocation, but of course, if the passenger cap was removed, then the slot allocation process vis-a-vis the IAA would be changed utterly. So it's not the IAA's role to set the cap, but that is an issue in what they are.
I think what they're trying to do, and they can come here and tell us themselves. But my understanding is that what they've tried to do is to assist or instruct the airport authority to avoid doing what they did in 2023, which for everybody probably in this room will accept that they have breached the cap. They are under investigation for it, but they have breached the cap. And they've already said in writing that they will breach the cap in 2024, or at least the department have. So, that's the position. It is what it is, as I've said already, Mr. O'Leary. It is a blunt instrument and it's not appropriate anymore because the transport links certainly will be improved. Metro is, I hope, a decision that Bord Pleanála will make imminently. But I'm a realist as well. I recognise it's a decade away. The impact, though, of this cap on growth in Dublin Airport is critical, but it is an immovable object until such time as it's gone. And I don't accept, I'm afraid, your points in relation to there being a legislative fix, because if we interfere in the planning process, it will immediately end up in the courts. It will be injuncted, and it will be back to square one. It'll be exactly like we're standing still at the moment, waiting for the planning authority and the noise regulator to make their decisions. I think you're long enough in the game to know that as well.
Well, can I respectfully disagree? But, let me agree with the first part of your point. We shouldn't be where we are today, but we are. If the DAA was competent, this planning should have taken place. I don't see any point in blaming the DAA or blaming Fingal County Council. The planning process has to take its place. But we have 2 choices as a nation with an aviation policy that says we will deliver growth and we will be a recognised global leader in aviation. We have a Minister for Transport. He has powers and he is also part of a majority government. The government can take action. We can have 2 decisions here. And yes, and I accept that this is politics, but of course it's politics. We can sit here on our hands for the next 4 years and export all this growth of traffic routes and jobs to every other European country, which will welcome them with open arms. Or we can rely on the Transport Minister and the government to take action. There are 2 forms of action. One, the Transport Minister can write to the IAA and tell them to suspend the cap while the planning process is ongoing. He does have that power.
I don't
and
believe
the
that
Housing
he does,
Minister.
Mr. O'Leary, and I think it'd probably be best for us to get some legal people to sit where you are and we can ask them that question. Yeah. And I would invite you to write to me and I will put your questions to them directly, but I don't think that is the case.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chairman. And thank you, Mr. O'Leary and others.
Thank you, Deputy Farrell. It's actually my own slot here now, so I just have a few points. And again, I think sometimes we forget in Ireland, we think Ryanair started here and it's our airline, which it is, but equally just how gigantic it is now. You're flying, 600,000 or 700,000 people a day, or certainly over 500,000 people a day, every day. Biggest airline, as you said, Portugal, Italy, Spain, Poland, and obviously Ireland and other. I'm sure there's lots of other countries as well. We actually have next week we have the DAA in. And the following week we have Eamon Ryan, and the following week we have Eamon Ryan. So it's actually very timely that you're here first, and we can certainly take on board some of your points with both the DAA and the Minister in the next couple of weeks, even though the Minister's not here on aviation. Once he's in the room, we can still question him. I asked the DAA the last time they were here, by the time you get the 40 million permission based on what we're looking at, your figures would be at 40 million anyway if you didn't have a cap. Should you not be looking at a kind of a mid-term strategy of 60 million and looking to apply for 60 million rather than 40 million? And is the 40 million a bit like Berlin Airport or somewhere where it's over capacity the day it opens? So that's a question maybe you might give your thoughts on. I'm equally wondering about your analysis of the DAA. You have been quite critical of them in the past, but in terms of their efficiency, could they be a lot more efficient? If you were in the position of Kenny Jacobs, what would you do as the chief executive? I know you probably wouldn't take the job based on where you are now, but if you had that job, what would you do as the DAA chief executive? Equally, maybe if you were the Minister for Transport, what would you like to do as Minister for Transport in terms of enhancing growth? I thought the figure, I had actually never heard the figure before, that 65% of your traffic is inbound. So that's all tourism, basically. I mean, that's what they're bringing money into the country. They're bringing tourists all over the island, staying in accommodation, spending money in pubs and restaurants and shops and so on. Because we all have a mindset where we're using Ryanair to go on our holidays or to go on business or whatever. Do you think that the growth just wasn't seen and that they thought they'd never hit this cap? Is that the reason they did nothing? And equally, I suppose, just in terms of the DAA and the Dublin Airport campus long term, is the growth, should all the growth be in T1 and T2, or is there any scope for this third terminal concept, which has been talked about quite a lot, that might necessitate the tunnel that you're saying is unnecessary, if that was ever to happen? But is that kind of, what's your take or thoughts on the third terminal? So that'll probably keep you on for a while. Thanks.
Thank you for those questions, Cahir. Look, firstly, there shouldn't be a cap. I mean, we have runway infrastructure now that will probably will take capacity at Dublin, traffic capacity Dublin up to 60 million passengers. And so the DAA are again mismanaging the process. It's this kind of fudgy, we have a cap of 32, let's apply to lift the cap to 40. The minute it gets lifted to 40, we will already be at 40 million passengers.
That was my point, yeah.
And then what? We'll go back and waste another 4 years trying to get to 45 or 48.
So there's no cap at all, really?
There shouldn't be. I mean, the cap should be on facilities. Like they got planning permission for 2 runways. They have 2 terminal buildings. They could improve the terminal buildings, and that's where we believe the money should be spent. But you're absolutely right. We're calling for scrapping the cap, not some planning process. The planning process has been addressed when the 2nd runway got permission to be built, because that took capacity up to 60. The DAA again mismanaged the process. I don't know why the DA never applied. I suspect they thought, there's DA been through numerous management changes in the last 10 or 15 years. We'll go back into the Department of Transport, and the Department of Transport will rubber stamp whatever it will be, and the situation has fundamentally changed. Planning is a much more difficult issue here. There has been at various stages of the last decade, though, talk about, we've passed legislation for strategically important assets. Dublin Airport is a strategically important asset. The LNG terminal in Shannon was strategically important. Should we have a small nuclear power plant on the island of Ireland? It would be strategically important, given that we have no energy independence at all. But we do need, as a country, going forward, to have a process where, for what is ever the government today decides is going to be strategically important investment, you bypass planning, or at least you fast track it. What should the DA be doing? I think the DAA should be, one, cancel. The problem with the DAA is they have a planning permission at the moment for a tunnel of 250 million, but they're about 4 years away from planning permission for planning permission to address, to lift this, the traffic cap. What they should be doing is fixing the car parks. When Kenny Jacobs is in here next week or whenever he's in here, you've been sitting there for a year.
He'll be in your chair this day week.
Well, last year you were telling people our car parks are full, please come by bus to the airport. You own about 300 acres of land around. Now, we suggested this last year in the middle of the car parking crisis at Dublin Airport, and it was kind of brushed off by Kenny. Well, we're not running a country fair. We want our passengers to be parking on tarmac. I think actually passengers would be quite happy to park in a field beside the airport during the months of June, July and August, if that means that's how you keep car parking capacity rising and costs down. And this kind of dismissive attitude of GA, oof, we're not running country fairs here. Country fairs operate very successfully during the summer when the ground is firm. And, you know, if you have a real commitment to delivering for your passengers or creating car parking for your passengers, that's what you do. But they've had 12 months from last summer to this summer to put some tarmac or 804 and dust on some of those fields, and you would have created, they already run the bus services, you can already have shuttles to and from the airport. They have sat on their hands doing nothing for the last year because they are secretly very happy to be able to increase the cost of car parking. And it's nothing we can do here. It's all the competition authorities' fault. They wouldn't let us buy that other car park down behind the, whatever it is, the hotel, and therefore we couldn't. Well, why didn't you put some dust on your fields and create additional car parking that way? So what we would do at Dublin Airport, cancel your stupid tunnel that's going nowhere, open up some more car parks and keep the cost of car parking down, which in much the same way as we apply for extra flights at Christmas, so we can keep the cost of flying at Christmas down and use the money you saved to expand Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. If you go through Terminal 1 where Ryanair is the major, it is quite oppressive during the middle of the summer. Like, there is not enough space there for people to sit down. I'm sorry we're a victim of our own success. We're shoveling people through that building, and it is quite an unacceptable, there's a lack of toilet capacity, lack of seating capacity, the retail offer is poor, and yet they sit there on their hands waiting to spend 250 million on a tunnel to go over there to where the cargo planes are. So, as usual, we would say the DA are pretty poor. What should the Minister for Transport do? The Minister for Transport do one of two things. One, scrap the cap. And I would come back again to Deputy Farrell, and I appreciate, but, you know, I think there would be more votes for this government and certainly for the Minister for Transport, and I would be no great fan of the Minister for Transport. There would be more votes for him in being seen to take action to lift the cap and keep airfares down and traffic and jobs growth up at Dublin Airport than there would be worrying about the appeal to on board Planola. Governments are there in the middle of a crisis to take action, and your voters expect action to be taken. And I think, you know, the new Taoiseach has got, and the government has got quite some, I think, kudos in recent weeks by being seen to take at least some action on tented villages in Mount Street and all the rest. And I'm not getting into the debate on immigration, but government gets credit for taking action. Government does not get credit for sitting there going, it's a planning issue and there's nothing we can do about this for the next 4 years. Sorry. And that's what I would do if I was Minister for Transport. But if I was Minister for Transport, I would have written back to Ryanair when we submitted him a plan to grow traffic on and off this island by 50% over the next 7 years. We gave him the plan, handed to him at our meeting on the 7th of March, and we're now at the end of, close to the end of June, and nothing. But, you know, sadly, my experience with this Minister for Transport is that tends to be the modus operandi. Lots of talk about solutions in 2050, but when it comes to actually taking decisions and taking some action now, nothing. And to come back to your last point, here, look, should there be a Terminal 3? We're largely speaking indifferent. I have never been a great supporter of having a Terminal 3 over on that side of the runway. There is more than sufficient space in Terminal 1 and Terminal 2. We have long campaigned and advocated. If you know where we are in Terminal 1, we should be knocking down the hangars. And the DA do have a plan, to be fair, to knock down those hangars on the north apron, where when you drive in, as you drive out, all those hangars on your left-hand side. That should be one long terminal building with lots more gates and lots more stands where we can park aircraft that go straight out onto the north runway. We now have 2 runways. The terminal infrastructure could be expanded at very modest costs, and what we don't need is to waste 250 million building a tunnel going nowhere to serve parcels, when our primary objective here should be to service Irish people going abroad and visitors coming to this country. And just to come back again, if you look, the Dublin Metro will never be a solution for Dublin Airport. I have no issue with the Dublin Metro if it is, for the people of Swords and Fingal and Rush, and it's a dart going to and from the centre of town. The idea, though, that the Dublin Metro will do anything for Dublin Airport is a fantasy. The current plan for the Dublin Metro is it will. The centre, I think it's the access in the centre of town has moved from Stephen's Green to Ranelagh. Nobody will be able to come in to get the Dublin Metro in Ranelagh to get to Dublin Airport, because there's going to be nowhere to park in Ranelagh. The Dublin Metro won't run at 4 a.m. in the morning, which is what you'll need to do to get passengers out to Dublin Airport for 5:30 to check in for the 6:30 flight. So the Dublin Metro will do nothing for the airport. But the people of Swords, and I employ an awful lot of people who live and work in Swords, do need better access to and from the centre of town. And if the Dublin Metro or a dart to Swords will solve that, I'd be all in favour of it.
Okay, and then just the last thing. I presume the cap at the moment is it mainly just reducing frequency and capacity on all your existing routes, or are there actual cities that Dublin Airport is missing out on going to that you would like to go to that you're not going to because of the cap?
Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you, deputies and senators. So, my job as Chief Commercial Officer, I planned the schedule. With respect, Deputy, I did have those 3 aircraft planned. There were 16 routes due to land in Dublin this year, so that was factually happening. So, there is routes we could add to Poland, across the Balkans, and particularly across Scandinavia. Morocco is somewhere we're growing rapidly at the moment. I think what sometimes gets missed in the debate here is that there's enormous competition post-COVID for Ryanair capacity across Europe. If you take this week, Europe is still not fully recovered versus what it was operating in June 2019. There's probably 3 to 5% less flights across Europe this week than there was in 2019. So I have between 10 and 12 airports or regional tourist bodies visiting me every week in Dublin. It's 2 things they're all doing. That's bringing me growth proposals and reducing costs for traffic. Generally speaking, I don't like saying it, but generally speaking, they laugh at me when I tell them what's happening in Dublin. 2 runways, and I can't add any capacity. After we announced 2 weeks ago that we wouldn't be adding capacity for Christmas, or couldn't, should I say, by the time I got back to the office, I had 2 missed calls from 2 airports, one in Poland and one in Italy, who wanted that capacity. So if you take, for instance, 2 weeks ago, I was in Katowice announcing the 3rd aircraft, in Katowice that was one of the aircraft meant to go in Dublin. That's a city of close to 2.5 million people. We've only 3 aircraft based in there. That's an airport that plans to double capacity over the next 4 years. So that's what's happening in the real world across Europe. Airports, governments, regional governments are competing aggressively for capacity because they know we can't grow in Ireland. And I'm sorry to say, they're laughing at us.
Dublin is your 2nd or 3rd biggest base?
2nd biggest base.
After Stansted?
After Stansted, yes.
Okay.
So it's a very important base for us.
Look, I just want to thank you all for giving up so much of your time today. We're not finished yet. I might come back in, but I want to let other members who haven't had a chance to come in. And again, thank you for what Ryanair is doing, not just for inbound tourism, but for all of us who regularly use Ryanair to go other places. Thank you very much. Now, thank you. Senator Crockwell, I'm sure you'll be talking about car parking, if not other things. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Chair. Mr. O'Leary, thank you for your very comprehensive report today before the committee. Just to put things in context, when I flew to England in 1968, my old man wouldn't let me go on the boat. It cost him 5 weeks' wages to fly me to London back in those days. So, and I recall through 68 to 76, coming over and back on the ferry, slow, miserable crossings with people sick all around you. You have revolutionised travel out of Ireland. There's no getting away from that. I'm just a little concerned when you say that because of restrictions on flights, that we're going to see fares of €500 each way. Is that a sort of a penalty against to force our citizens to turn on the political side of the country?
No. But I do think what it is we're getting our kind of our what is it? We're getting our kind of our position out there first. If we don't and aren't able to add 270,000 additional seats to and from Dublin this year, the flights coming home at Christmas are going to be dramatically higher. And we will have all the airlines are profiteering, airlines are putting up the fares at Christmas. And I want it well known, we are not putting up the fares here because it's Christmas. We're putting up the fares here because we have an arcane and idiotic traffic cap at Dublin Airport, which is preventing us adding 270,000 extra seats.
But in reality, you're using an economic tool, supply and demand. There's demand is greater than supply, ergo we can make a bit of a profit.
But that's been the case every Christmas. Like, the question is, do we add 270,000 extra seats and take, I don't want to bleed these passengers to anywhere else. I don't want them going on boats. We do add huge amounts of seat capacity for about a 20-day period over Christmas and New Year. And without that, the fares would be materially higher. We are facing a situation this Christmas where the fares are going to be materially higher because we are going to have 270,000 less seats. We will allocate those seats. That we will be adding extras in Madrid, we'll be adding extras in Rome. The seats will go elsewhere. We will probably add some extra seats into Belfast, but we only have 3 aircraft based in Belfast, so we have a limit. But so it's not us using an economic weapon, but people need to understand the consequences. Deputy Farrell rightly said to me, well, these 4 aircraft, 16, they're not really lost to Dublin because we never had them, which is true, although you would have had them if we didn't have the cap this year. But Christmas is going to be, maybe the October schools midterm and Christmas is going to be, first of all, people really begin to see and feel what is the impact of this cap at Dublin Airport on pricing, particularly at peak periods where we can't add extras.
Okay, car parks. My colleague said I would speak about car parks. I
thought you might.
When DAA bought the Q Park, I immediately objected and sent an objection to the Competition Authority. That car park could be opened today. I know a number of people are willing to lease it, pending the final decision on what happens. We have a final decision from the Competition Authority, and ironically, last week I was told that DAA are now about to lease the car park. I don't understand, if it was anti-competitive to buy it and run it, how the hell it's not anti-competitive to lease it and run it. But it strikes me, and I've said it to DAA, and I will say it to them again next week, their primary business is to run an airport. What the hell are they doing involving themselves in car parking? That's one of my issues. The other issue I have is we had the Irish Rail in here a little while ago, and I asked about taking a spur line from Swords into the airport, and they told us it could be done in 2 years. Planning permission and planning 1 year, and 1 year to build it. We're talking about a metro. You said it won't happen in your lifetime. I don't think it'll happen in my grandchildren's lifetime. And that's my view of it, because every twist and turn will be hammered through planning, through court hearings. So why not use the Swords spur? Why not have a circular spur going in and out from Swords to the airport? To me, it makes perfect sense. You get a train from the city centre and straight to Swords.
Without interruption, please.
Now, the other thing, the tunnel.
You'll have your say in a minute.
You and I might disagree on the tunnel. I understand the function of the tunnel is a health and safety issue, to move packages from one side of the airport to the other. I'm not sure of that. It has been suggested to me that that's the reason why. It sort of makes sense. It's not unusual to find tunnels in airports where things move over and back. I don't see how it should slow things down, mind you. I don't see how it should impede the working of the airport. We built the north runway and continue to operate, so I don't see that. Pilot shortage is the next thing I want to ask you about. And I have two sides to this. I understand there's a shortage of pilots and pilot training facilities which would impede your expansion aspirations. Two things there. One, is that true? And two, would you consider opening a pilot training school over in Shannon or Knock in order to increase the capacity of pilot training? I'm sure there's plenty of other airlines looking for pilots. And given your success in carrying passengers, I think it mightn't be a bad idea. So I'll leave you answer those for a moment.
Thanks, Senator. I come back on each of those points individually. I couldn't agree more with you on your opposition to the Q Park. It would be fundamentally wrong to allow the DAA to monopolise all the car parking at Dublin Airport. Q Park was one of the offered a competitor and a lower cost car parking service. It was more remote, a lower cost car parking service to Dublin Airport. I think the Competition Authority were absolutely correct to reject the DAA buying it, but it's used as a distraction by the DAA. If the DAA say car parking is full, we would go back and say, why are you not opening up some of the 300 acres of land, the fields that you own immediately around the airport, around the environs of the airport? Yeah. You had the winter to put in some 804 and dust. In fact, you could do it in less than 3 months. You don't need planning permission for a temporary car parks, and these would be temporary car parks. And Dublin, it is a peak supply. So when the DA come back in here 2 weeks or in a week's time, don't be distracted. Don't let Kenny Jacobs mention Q Parks. Ask him why he is not opening up some of the fields or developing some of the fields for car parking around Dublin Airport. And you will get also health and safety. People just want the right to park a car during June, July and August and not get scalped. He's charging more for car parking than we are for the airfares to get you to London. A spur train line, I've no issue. I mean, again, the problem with public transport, and if you take an airport like Heathrow, which has it has the Heathrow Express and it has the Underground, less than 15% of the passengers going to and from Heathrow, which is the UK's, use the train. Most come by bus or most drive. The problem with all these train solutions at airports is people generally for early morning or late evening go from their home to the airport. It is not convenient for them to drive into, I don't know whether it's Connolly Station or Houston Station or Bushorus or Stevens Green. They're not going to drive into the centre of town at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning to get public transport to get to the airport and then to do it on the way back. It is, and we all know it is our natural instinct, if we are going to the airport for an early morning or late evening flight, you'll drive there, you'll park, whatever the car parking is, that's what you'll do because that's the most convenient for you. 90% of people going to and from the airport are coming from their homes. The inbound passengers who are the visitors are very well served. At Dublin, we are incredibly fortunate. Whoever designed Dublin in 1939 or picked the location at Collinstown, it's only 9 kilometres from the centre of town. It is very well served by buses. I mean, the service of the bus and the capacity the buses put on is massively underestimated. The buses in 2007, when the planning restriction was put in place, accounted for 5% of Dublin's traffic. Today, buses deliver between 25 and 30% of Dublin's traffic, mainly huge volumes of the inbound. And it is not buses going to the centre of... there's buses going to Mullingar, to Kinnegad, buses going to Knock Airport from Dublin. Buses are the way we solve this problem without wasting billions of pounds on a metro solution. And, again, I have no issue with a metro or a train if it is just for commuters going to and from, Whitehall, Drumcondra, Whitehall, Swords, Rush, where most of huge numbers of my employees live. Fine, but it doesn't solve Dublin Airport. Dublin Airport gets solved by having more car parking capacity so that you keep the cost of car parking reasonable and more buses. And it is very well served by buses. Health and safety. When Kenny Jacobs starts talking to you in 2 weeks' time about the health and safety of parcels, and we need to spend 250 million euros so that the parcels will be healthier and safer, going around Dublin Airport. Ask him why the cargo airlines are not paying the 250 million euros. What they're doing is gaming the regulatory system as they have always done. We need to spend 250 million building this. I mean, it's a 2-lane tunnel. It's a 4-lane tunnel to get to the other side of a taxiway that you can drive across. None of the airlines support this. All of the airlines, Aer Lingus, ourselves, everybody else, completely opposed to this. The problem is he wants to spend 250 million euros because the regulator will allow him to increase passenger charges at Dublin Airport to pay for a tunnel to ensure that the parcels are healthier and safer. Now, frankly, you can criticise me. I don't care much about the parcels. The parcels are not time sensitive. They're not subject to, one or two might fall off the back of a truck, but no one's going to get injured. The parcels can either drive across the taxiway or they can go around the airport, which is what they do at the moment. None of this is time sensitive.
But in fairness now, Mr. O'Leary, maybe he wants to increase the volume of aircraft using the runway, so he can't have trucks driving over and back across it.
Well, I mean, it's not a runway, it's a taxiway. It's a closed runway. If you go back to the picture, but I refer you to the picture, the old runway has now been closed. It's just a taxiway. And they do this in many European airports. Cologne Bonn, which is one of Germany's bigger airports, they actually put down railway gates both sides and traffic lights. And if there's somebody using the taxiway, the traffic can't drive across it, and then the aircraft goes through, up go the railway, and off you go. Now, that would cost you...
I'll let you back in again, but your time is up. Okay.
But sorry, that would cost you less than $1 million. And it would save our passengers, our consumers and visitors, the 250 million that he wants to inflate the airport charges by. Lastly, there is no pilot shortage, I'm happy to say. There's a report put out generally by the pilot unions about every 3 or 4 years that there's a worldwide shortage of pilots. There has never been a shortage of people who earn what pilots earn, and they are entitled to it. It's a very skilled profession. We are training about 1,000 cadets every year. We're opening up, presently we're spending 50 million building a pilot training centre in Madrid and another one in Krakow in Poland to take our annual capacity for pilots. We're going to produce 1,500 cadets every year. We need about 700-800 cadets for our own resources, so we're training more trainee pilots than we need. We already have a large pilot training school in Ireland, in Dublin. In Swords, we spent about 25 million euros on it. It's just close to Dublin Airport. 6 simulators, state of the art, and it produces about 250 or 300 cadets, pilot cadets every year. Pilots are a very skilled profession, but they are very well paid. They do have very good working conditions. By law, a pilot cannot fly more than 900 hours a year by law, which is an average of 18 hours a week if you run it over a 50 or a 48-hour year. So I wouldn't begrudge them at all what they earn. It is a particularly easy job on a sunny day when there's no clouds, but they earn every cent of their corn when you're landing in crosswinds or thunderstorms, as we've had all over Europe, or in low visibility. They earn every cent of it, but there is no pilot shortage, and I'm pleased to say certainly in Ryanair, we're essentially going to be the only big 737 operator in Europe, and we're training more pilots than we will need for ourselves.
Thanks, Senator Crockwell.
Thank you, Senator.
Now, our next contributor is Deputy Smith. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. O'Leary and Mr. McGuinness, Mr. Keeley, for not only coming today, but for your presentation, which actually includes details of flights that, as you said, not wanting to open up the debate you had with Deputy Farrell, being foregone, and actually tries to put across the impact that this cap has. What's been frustrating for me and for others is that an awful lot of the discussion about this from the DAA is quite vague. It's done on the airwaves, and there's no detail, even a PowerPoint presentation such as you put through today. So that's appreciated. I just want to pick up a couple of points. I just want to start, if I could, on the Metrolink, which I believe is a must, and it's not just a Dublin Airport piece of supporting infrastructure. If it is built as is planned, it would be 24/7. It would assist the workers of your company and indeed the airport. It is designed for the growth of the town of Swords, which is currently 50,000 up to 100,000 people, and there will be a park and ride there as well, and it's to serve DCU and the city centre. So it's not the answer to Dublin Airport's problems, but it is a long-term solution to some of the transport infrastructure constraints that could impact Dublin Airport. Like, the cap is based, rightly or wrongly, not on local traffic concerns, but on national road plans. So it's not getting the turn at Keely's Pub or the roundabout just beyond it. It's a national road plan. Okay, I think that needs to be said, because I think whilst you put across your case quite well in the PowerPoint presentation, you do give the impression that maybe Fingal County Council are quite insular and small and slow in dealing with things, whereas they have had to deal with a 7,500 page planning application with 700 plus drawings dropped on them a week and a half before Christmas by the DAA, and within 8 weeks they got a comprehensive reply back to the DAA, and they're waiting to hear back to that. So everyone, I think, in this whole space has common cause with how frustrating the Dublin Airport has been managed by the management of the DAA, including residents around North County Dublin. And I think by calling them NIMBYs, I don't think is fair. They you have been very frustrated for many years by the management of the DAA. We have been frustrated by the management of the DAA. There's no reason why the local residents don't have understandable cause to be frustrated by the management of DAA in relation to flight paths being one of them, which isn't what we're here to talk about today. But when you've been brought through a process for east-west takeoffs for the new runway, for insulation schemes, and the first day that runway opens up and the flights diverge 30 degrees to the north and cross over new estates and towns that were never supposed to be, or were never told were going to be crossed, you can understand the frustration there. And then the DAA come in here and say, oh my God, that was the news to us. That was a surprise to us that we woke up and we looked out our windows and saw the flights go. I mean, it's an affront to us, to users of the airport, and to the residents. So I just want to get that on the record. Just in terms of quieter aircraft, how do you calculate aircraft A, traditional aircraft, with the modern aircraft? Is it decibel level, like the 80 decibel average, like for an aircraft noise or whatever? Is this new aircraft 40 decibels in terms of half the noise, or how do you calculate that? Or how is that calculated?
There's a noise profile. I mean, you're above my technical competence here. I can send you in. There's a noise profile of our older aircraft, which are the older 737s. And it's done by some kind of decimal. I mean, if you've flown on our older aircraft and one of the current ones, the game changers, they are materially quieter. Even if you're indoor, you'll notice how much quieter they are. But there is a noise envelope. Our existing aircraft are about 50% less noisy by decimal level, and I don't know how that decimal level is measured compared to our older aircraft. And the MAX 10s that we're getting, or that we hope to get in 2027, reduce that again by another 30%. So there's an 80% reduction in noise between our older aircraft and the newer aircraft that we're getting in 2027. We've put a video up on the Ryanair website, and I fully agree. I'll come back on the other points. Fingal, I've no issue with Fingal County Council at all. They do. Fingal County Council have to do what they have to do. My issue is why the Minister for Transport is not taking action, some alternative action. We have gone round and measured on a decibel level, and 3 critical areas. One of the things that's not well understood here, when we only had the one runway, all of the traffic was taking off or landing over St. Margaret's. There was one flight path. We now have 2 runways, so you have 2 flight paths. I appreciate that does bring other houses in Ashbourne and Ballybohol into under a noise path, but you've reduced the number of takeoffs over St. Margaret's by 50% simply by using 2 runways. We have gone around and we've put up noise measuring equipment in St. Margaret's, in Ballybohol and in Ashbourne. Without any aircraft overhead, the average noise levels is 48 in St. Margaret's, 45 decibels in Ballybohol and 39 in Ashbourne. When an aircraft is overhead, St. Margaret's goes from 48 to 53 decibels, Ballybohol goes from 45 to 53 decibels, and Ashbourne goes from 39 to 48 decibels. And this is a video up on our website, which is, to put that in some context, if you're on O'Connell Street Bridge, that's 70 decibels. And if you're in Sydney Parade Avenue, that's 72 decibels when a dart is passing by. So nobody would want to belittle that there is a noise issue at Dublin Airport, but the noise is dramatically reducing, and nobody, I know RTE are much beloved of going out and interviewing some teary-eyed mother whose children can't sleep late at night, but they never put up a noise measuring equipment that shows actually it's about 48 decibels. It's perfectly quiet out there. So we've had difficulty trying to access the noise measuring data from ANCA. Where it is and that. So you can get it on the Ryanair website. Yeah. So I'll be watching that video, and then I might come back to the company to see if there's more details that can be ascertained from it, which would be interesting. Could I just go for because you mentioned your workers and living close by. The company recently purchased homes in Swords and Fosterstown Place, 25 of them. Are they fully accommodated now? Not fully, but about 3/4. And is this something that the company are looking to do again continually? No, I mean, I expect we have the challenge we face here is we new cabin crew who are generally, our new cabin crew are generally earning between 25 and 35,000 euros. So they would be the lowest paid people in our operation. Within a year, they get promoted to being supervisors. You're up between 40 and 50,000. Where we struggle in recent years is we can't find accommodation. We have accommodation for new joining cabin crew in City West, in Tala, in Wicklow, and no public transport to get to the airport either early in the morning or late in the evening. And we found the only way we were going to solve this problem was we need accommodation in and around Swords, where the vast majority of our people live. But we can't guarantee availability of accommodation, as you know yourself. I mean, Fingal, Swords is the fastest growing town in Europe. There is enormous pressure on accommodation, and we can't find readily available rental accommodation around the airport. So we felt the only way to fix this was we have bought now about 40 houses in and around Swords and across it around the airside retail park. And then there was a new development going into Fosterstown, and we bought, I think, 25 units there. So we now have about 150 bedrooms, is how we measure it. That accommodates, we expect to bring in about 150 new cabin crew every summer. We expect that then will provide them with low-cost accommodation, well, reasonably priced accommodation, but much more important is access to it, one bus stop away from Dublin Airport. And then by the time, but they will only have access to that for the first 12 months, and we expect them within that 12 months to move out. Generally, they form friendships, move out, and they will rent somewhere else themselves by year 2 or year 3 of that accommodation.
Okay. Could I have another minute or two, if that's okay, Chair? There was understandable frustration from young people or people who build up their deposit, and I think, but there was also an understanding within the town itself because they're all airport people, and they know the pressures on accommodation there. So there was a mixed response. There was understandable anger, but there was also an understanding that these workers who helped the local community of Swords and Fingal thrive need a place to stay. So I think that needs to be understood, because again, it was a pretty black and white back and forth on media over it, on it. But sorry, just getting back to the planning application, the one thing I wanted to ask you was the 7,000 page, 700 drawing application is the largest planning application ever given into Dublin or to Fingal County Council, and that includes the raising of the passenger cap. Would you have put that planning application in yourself, or would you put an individual planning application in for removing the cap or whatever? And why was the decision made, do you believe, for the DAA to put in that huge, enormous 10 infrastructure projects plus the passenger cap raising piece of?
We believe partly is because the DAA it suits the DAA to have the traffic cap in place for the next 2, 3, 4 years.
But they'll say they're losing routes as well. They'll say, they come here and they go, well, we can't get in the big planes that are going to come in and fly from Ethiopia off to New York and all that. They couldn't
care less. It suits them fine to increase fees by 45% for the next 4 years. And you ask the DA, why did you not open up some more car parks on the land that you own around Dublin Airport this winter? You knew you were going, car parks were going to be full this summer, and they'll be sitting there, oh, well, because we wanted to buy Q Park. Like, the DAA are masters at under-delivering capacity and increasing fees. That's what they do. I mean, I think it is unconscionable that the DAA did not go in with a single planning application to raise this cap, but they chucked the kitchen sink into it. They have, I mean, we were listening today, they've gone in for a planning application for a viewing platform for aircraft spotters around. Really? Is that now? And of course that will be put into the regulatory asset base, that will be into the IAA, and we'll have to increase charges again so they can build some shiny viewing platform for plane spotters. The DAA continually mismanage at this airport. They should have gone in with a single application to say, even if we need a temporary lift, and there is legislative basis there, we need a temporary or raise in this cap to 36 million for the next 2 years to allow us to grow jobs, etc., etc. It would still have had to gone through the planning process, but it would at least have been a much simpler plan. They put in this 10,000 paper document, and it has extensions of terminals and all the paraphernalia to make it more complicated. They know it's going to take 4 years. But during that 4-year period, the DAA have approval from their regulator to increase the fees, passenger fees, by 46%.
And again, just to say that in that planning application for everything, which includes the viewing platform that Mr. O'Leary said there, it doesn't include any on-the-ground noise mitigation measures, which are relatively low cost, and again, something which would help improve relationships with the community in terms of the aircraft noise, which is a big part of this overall conversation. It imbues everything we talk about, and we can't ignore that. So look, I've gone well over my time. I'm sorry to my colleagues who want to come back in.
I'll let you back in again, and don't worry.
And thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Deputy Smith. I should let Deputy Farrell in the first time, so I am going to let you in the first time in round 2 if you do want to come back in.
Thanks very much, Chairman. Thanks very much, Chairman. The only thing I want to say, sorry, to the sound people pressing the button, is that this has been a really informative conversation, but the amount of uninformed statements being made is extraordinary from members and witnesses in relation to public transport, in relation to accessibility in swords, in relation to the planning application, in relation to the regulatory systems that are being operated in the background.
I hope I wasn't one of them, but maybe I was.
In relation to what is in the planning application that's before the council and what is not, what is before ANCA, what ANCA's decision is made, what is before the courts. I find it extraordinary. I'm only appointed to this committee a few weeks, but I do find it extraordinary that we're having this conversation in this context. And it's all, I'm baffled that we are here talking about stuff that we're clearly not informed on. And I think it's the role of the committee, and yours, Mr. O'Leary, to know, to put facts before this committee. There's loads of opinions. Some of them I'm sure have foundation. But I'm really struggling with this from the point of view of, having a disagreement about foregone and lost. Sure, I understand the point, but it's not there, so you can't lose it. But it's something that the airport and the Irish people and your airline are not able to realise. Therefore, you're not able to realise the profit associated with it, and the public aren't able to realise the use of the slots. But there always has to be regulatory decisions. I repeat what I said earlier in relation to the capacity of the minister or the government to intervene and, like that, change the planning authority, the highest planning authority in this country, on Bord Pleanála's decision. He can't. Is that unfortunate? Sure. Is there something we could do from a legislative perspective? Yes, we could. But would it be immediately challenged? Yes, it would. There's 4 different people that I can think of straight away who are both resourced and motivated to appeal it. And it would probably even go to Europe, just to, excuse the expression, but wind us all up. And I think you know that too. But I think what we really should be talking about is the immediate things that we can do, the solutions that we can do. And just to go to Senator Crockwell's point and about Q Park, about the car parking scenario, about the use of fields, land owned by the DA. You can't tarmac it and use it as a car park without planning permission. You just can't. Not only can you not do it as a private citizen, but you absolutely can't do it as a semi-state commercial body. So again, lots of stuff being thrown out. I find it very difficult to sit here and not say something. I sat quietly while all the others made their contributions, but I do think it would be helpful if this committee based itself in fact and tried to stay in fact throughout the whole process. But it's not a question. I don't require a response. Thanks, Chairman.
But I think it deserves a response. Firstly, you don't need planning permission for a temporary car park. You can park on the grass and you can put 804 and dust on it. As long as it's a temporary car park, you don't need planning permission. No agricultural show gets planning permission, and there's lots of them around the country. The point, we're not talking about 2 different things. They're not, sorry. If you're going to sit there and kind of say, there's nothing we can do here, the planning process has to take its 4-year course, there's nothing we can do. That is not what we elect our governments to do. I would argue the other way around in favour of. There are solutions. Yes, some may be politically inconvenient. Yes, some may run some risk of a court challenge. But I would rather have our government going, lift the cap for the next 3 or 4 years and we'll take our chances with a court challenge, than sitting there for 4 years exporting these routes and these jobs and this traffic to other European airports who are laughing at us saying, there's nothing we can do here because that's the planning process. Governments have two choices. They can sit there and do nothing, or they can take action. And I believe that governments who take action will be rewarded at the polls. We can lift the cap. You don't need planning permission for a temporary car park. We only need those additional cars. The car park, the DA have said the car parks are full for weekends in July and August. They own 300 acres of land there. It is reasonably straightforward,
Again,
and you
Chairman,
could park in those
I just
fields.
point out, Mr. O'Leary, with respect, you've talked about those things, I think, on 3 separate occasions. I didn't address them once. I expressed my opinion. It wasn't a question. I think, it's on the record where you stand. It's on the record where I stand.
Oh, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just on, you mentioned that that there's no intervention possible with Bord Pleanála, but if I understood your point correctly.
I don't think
You said legally.
Well, for strategic infrastructure, the Minister for Housing can issue directions to Bord Pleanála for strategic infrastructure only.
yes, but this isn't strategic infrastructure.
It very well should be. That's our position.
I'm not doubting that, but I'm saying that it isn't, so you can't.
You're saying at the moment it doesn't meet the criteria, and you're saying it should. Or it does or it should?
It should. It
I
did.
agree it should, but it isn't.
Currently it doesn't. Okay. Now, if you're finished, Deputy Farrell, Deputy Crowe, if you'd like to come back in, go ahead.
Thanks, Chairman. Just want to come in a few points from earlier. So we mentioned the National Aviation Policy, which is coming up for review. It's grossly outdated. And I'm just wondering, beyond the passenger cap, because I think we've that well covered, what would be your key asks? I'm sure you'll be making a submission to the Minister around that time, and I'm just wondering, getting ahead of that, what would be your key asks of the Minister at that time? I just additionally want to ask you then, you've repeatedly said, this is a bit of a tongue-in-cheek question, but I know you give tongue-in-cheek answers as well. You said that Dublin Airport are,
outrageous slurs. I'm sure I have to give out to you about.
You've criticised management of it, and I'm just wondering where in Ireland would you say an airport's been well managed? That was my question. And just overall, look, the Ryanair model is working well, but it's going extremely well. You're getting a lot of people around but I just think, again, it's not for us to advise you on your commercial model, but the public, I think, would really love to see Ryanair move into that transatlantic space. And you might just elaborate on why is it tricky at either side of the Atlantic for you to do that? Because every time, guarantee you, if there was even a whisper of that out there, it would be trending, it would be spoken about in every house in Ireland. I think Irish people, we have a hankering to get across the Atlantic, but it's damn expensive. So I'm just wondering, is there any space in which you can do that? And is there anything from a regulatory point of view that needs to happen on either side of the Atlantic for that to happen?
Okay. On aviation policy, Deputy Crowe, I wouldn't change a word of Ireland's aviation policy. I think Ireland's aviation policy is a terrific document. It's just the Minister for Transport doesn't pay any attention to it. I mean, if you look at Ireland's aviation, and it's a very brief summary, it's centred around 3 main aims: enhance Ireland's connectivity, ensuring safe, secure and competitive access responsive to the needs of business, tourism and consumers. Absolutely signed up. But you can't have a passenger cap at your main airport and say that's our policy. 2, to foster growth of aviation enterprise in Ireland, to support job creation and position Ireland as a recognised global leader in aviation. How can we be a recognised global leader in aviation? We're sitting there going, sorry, the airport's full and there's nothing we can do here for 4 years because that's the way the planning process works. And 3, to maximise the contribution of the aviation sector to Ireland's economic growth and development. We have made a written submission to the Transport Minister on the 7th of March, 2.5 months ago, which would increase traffic to and from this island by 50% over the next 6 years, maximising the contribution of the aviation sector to Ireland's economic growth and development. And we can't even get a reply. I mean, they'll be building a statue.
Did you meet him in March as well, or was it just?
Yeah, no, he very kindly, after it did take 4 years, but he very kindly came out to Airside, which I know is a long way from Ranelagh, but he came to the north side. We welcomed him to Fingal. We had a very useful meeting, and we gave him the most ambitious growth proposal that any company has submitted to the Irish government, I would say, in the last 25 or 30 years. And for 2.5 months, nothing. Now, he has other responsibilities, transport, communications, environmental. There's a whole transport wing in that department.
But sorry to interject, wouldn't you be then going to Minister Jack Chambers, because it's largely within his remit to deal with this?
The Minister for Transport is Eamon Ryan, you know, and so much as we value and the approach. I mean, I know Jack Chambers is the Aviation Minister, but this is a transport issue, and you know, I'm very happy. I've met with Minister Chambers as well, but I would have thought. The advantage of having a transport minister who is one of the triumvirate of party leaders that, you know, meet weekly to decide government policy and all the rest is we have a seat at the table where all these big decisions are being made and nothing. We can't get anything out of them. So those are the key. The key answer we have an excellent aviation policy. Please implement it. Please act on it. What airports get it and do well? I mean, the best one I would come to at the moment is Bergamo in Italy. Charleroi and Bergamo in Italy continues to expand every year. They expand the terminal. They have, I don't know how they manage planning in Italy, but, you know, it is. We started flying to Bergamo 22 years ago. This year, Bergamo's traffic will be?
Close to 14 million euros with us.
But in total, it's about
15 to 16 million.
50 to 60 million passengers. So it's almost half the size of Dublin Airport. With no kind of, you know, not government owned or anything else. I mean, it is owned by the local city. But there's lots of European airports. I mean, the Eastern European airports are much more aggressive about growth in Poland, in the Baltic states, Ukraine. We were the largest airline in Ukraine before the war. But they don't struggle with the kind of planning challenges we struggle with. We accept that we struggle with planning challenges. But government, what I don't accept is that government can't do anything about this for the next 4 years. And when the airfares home at Christmas are €1,000 return, I want to be pointing to the Minister for Transport and say, you know, we told you this is what was going to happen, and it can still be avoided if somebody directs the IAA to waive the cap or to allow us to add these extra flights at Christmas.
Okay.
And the third one, transatlantic, and it is technical. Transatlantic is a different business to short-haul flying. In short-haul, whether you're in North America or in Europe, nobody will pay for premium traffic anymore. There is no business class anymore. Nobody wants to show up in a business lounge at 7 o'clock in the morning, as my father would have done 30 years ago, quaffing champagne at 7 o'clock before you went on the red-eye flight to London. Or the pie-eyed flight to London, but you paid about £209 return because you weren't staying a Saturday night. Now people want to show up at the airport, they don't want to check in a bag, they want to go straight through security, get on the plane, get there, get their job done and get home. On long haul, you still have to show up 3 hours beforehand. There are 20% of the passenger base will pay you some gargantuan airfare. I was on Results Roadshow about 3 weeks ago. I had to go to New York, to North America for a week, visiting shareholders. The quote, I was going to do the PR, the financial PR in London. The return fare from London to New York and coming back Aer Lingus, Chicago to Dublin was 13,500 sterling. In business class. Now, to be fair to Aer Lingus, if I went out on the Sunday afternoon from Dublin to New York and came back on exactly the same flight from Chicago to Dublin on early on Friday morning, it was about 4,500, 5,000 euros. And because we're a low fares airline, I went out on the Sunday with Aer Lingus and came back the following day. But I will not fly. I will fly economy everywhere around Europe. I will not fly economy across the Atlantic. If I'm coming back, I need to sleep. I want to have a shower when I arrive here and go and do a day's work, and I will pay whatever that is. Because the 20% of the business on long haul will pay are completely price insensitive because it's largely paid by their employer. That high yield traffic pays for all of the rest of the aircraft. The economy stuff is the cream on top for those airlines. And it is impossible for somebody, nobody has yet demonstrated that rich people are willing to move from, say, Dublin and to depart from Knock and land in Rhode Island. They won't do it because historically they've always gone from Dublin to JFK or from Heathrow to JFK or from Frankfurt to JFK, and that's the way long haul works. It is just a different business model.
Thank you. Thank you, Deputy
Thank you, Deputy Crowe.
Just a couple of points on my own behalf. The 65% inbound, obviously you're talking about moving from 33 aircraft of a base to 40 aircraft in Dublin. And in fact, to be fair, your projections are actually showing that more of your growth is in the other 5 airports than in Dublin. So more than 50% of your planned growth that you showed to Eamon Ryan from the 20 million to 30 million, it's 4.3 more out of Dublin and it's 5.7 more out of the others. So you actually are doing what a lot of our non-Dublin members would like in terms of focusing that way. But at the same point, has anyone done the economic analysis of what Ireland is losing by these 7 aircraft, the staff, the jobs that you create directly, the tourism, the flights that we're all missing out on, the tourists who are not coming to Ireland to spend their money in pubs and restaurants and go and visit the Cliffs of Moher or whatever it is. Has anyone looked at that?
I'm sorry. I'm sure we can, but thank you, Deputy Crow. I'm sure we can send something into the committee unless you have some numbers there.
I don't to hand.
We think the numbers are compelling as they are on their own.
Oh, no, they are.
And so
I'm just wondering how big. I just like to. It would be. I'm an accountant by background, and I kind of like to see figures. And I know it'll be a very big figure, but I'd like to just realise how big it is.
Well, we know the one statistic that is accurate. There's about 750 direct jobs for every 1 million passengers. So there's another 7,500 jobs. Now, Ireland is in full employment at the moment, so, what was compelling in terms of job creation 20 years ago when everybody was emigrating with 20% unemployment. But there's 7,500 additional jobs straight away.
But all that pure cash coming into the country, that's foreign money coming in to be spent here.
And I think, and sometimes, and with due respect, to the Fingal deputies, there is an issue with noise at Dublin Airport. I think, and I fully agree with Deputy Smith, the DA has not handled the local residents well over many years. But what is missed in sometimes when you have a debate on the airwaves here is the noise at Dublin Airport or the residents around Dublin Airport. Nobody mentions the hotels in Leinster or the hotels in the restaurants, the hotels, all the tourism jobs that are vital, that are created and sustained by bringing in these additional visitors. We cannot stop growing. Our Minister for Transport is much beloved of, we need a climate solution here. Well, sorry, we need in the medium term, we need jobs, new hotels are being opened, new leisure facilities are being developed, and we need to keep growing. We are an island on the periphery of Europe. Europe loves taxing air travel. The people who suffer most in that are actually the short-haul flights to the peripheral countries of Europe, Ireland, Portugal, Spain, Italy, Greece, Malta, Cyprus. Thankfully, the Italians have now said we're vetoing any more environmental taxes. I've yet to hear the Irish government say they're going to veto any more environmental taxes on aviation. It's fine for the Dutch and the Belgians and the Germans who live at the centre of Europe, who have alternative of motorways, trains. But if you live in Ireland, you don't have those alternatives if you want access to and from. And one of our proudest associations in Ryanair is we sponsor the European Erasmus programme. We give discounted flights to about 70,000 students moving all over. And I think it's one of the great successes of Europe has been the educational program for Erasmus students. One of the tragedies of Brexit, apart from the economic catastrophe it has been in the UK, is that English students are now cut off from Erasmus and vice versa. The way forward in Europe is low-fare air travel, encouraging our young people to travel all over Europe for leisure, but also for study, and to kind of to increasingly integrate and break down barriers between the nations of Europe.
Okay, thanks for that. I mean, I spoke in Brussels at a committee about the decarbonisation of the hard to decarbonise sector of aviation and maritime, and exactly what you were saying. We had the centre of Europe all saying that we should ban short flights, France, Germany, Belgium and so on, and then all of a sudden we all start speaking of Cyprus, Malta, northern Sweden, the Canary Islands, ourselves going, there's not a one size fits all. By all means, if you want to go from Brussels to Amsterdam, why would you fly? That's fine. You probably don't have that route and probably wouldn't want that route. But we are an island, off an island that doesn't even want to be part of the EU. And,
it might be changing their minds, but nevertheless.
We live in hope, but I think the metro might arrive before that.
The bizarre issue in the EU is the EU is only taxing EU passengers. Aviation accounts for 2.4% of Europe's CO2 emissions, so 2.4%. 53% of that 2.4% is created by long-haul flights, and we exempt all the long-haul flights. So the people creating most of the CO2 emissions in aviation in Europe, which is the Americans, the Russians, the Chinese, and everybody else coming to Europe, are completely exempt. And yet we are taxing the hell out of our citizens in Europe on their short-haul flights.
Internal EU flights, is that right? So your flights to Albania are not affected, or your flights now to the UK are not affected?
Even more bizarre, Our flights to the Canary Islands for winter sun are paying the full ETS, which is about, it averaged out about €5 per passenger, per Ryanair passenger. Our winter sun flights to Morocco, right beside the Canaries, because it's outside the EU, are exempt. We're making flights to Morocco cheaper and penalising winter sun flights to the Canaries, because the system was designed by a Dutch.
Even though it's a duty-free zone and it's kind of semi in and out of the EU when it's
correct.
Yeah,
like crazy stuff. I mean, I don't, look, we accept. I think nobody would argue as an airline or our pilot. Everybody accepts that we should, if you're flying, you should make your contribution, or there should be some fair environmental tax. But everybody should pay their fair share. And it is unarguable that the richest people coming here on long-haul flights to Europe, who create the majority of Europe's aviation CO2 emissions, are completely exempt. Pay your fair share.
I think if it was, I'm going to do my tongue-in-cheek bit now and say perhaps you might be willing to invite us as a committee or committee members out to your headquarters to see. I think, as Eamon Ryan did, I think a lot of members might be interested in visiting Camp Air.
Actually, that's a very good idea, Kieran. Not alone, you might find it more useful. We have a training centre in Swords now, a €30 million training centre, where we're training pilots and cabin crew, and you might find more, but you'd be more than welcome. We'd be happy to host the committee at any date would be convenient for you.
Well, you might, if you invite us, we can come, put it that way.
Great, yeah.
So I appreciate that. And then finally, I think well, I mean, we can go to Morocco on a separate visit.
We can facilitate that as well.
I'm sure we'll pay our fair share. I don't want to let you go before asking, I don't know how we've managed to get this far. I suppose we are talking to Dublin. We haven't mentioned ATC at all. Where are we going with ATC in Europe? I mean, it's been very challenging for a lot of flights. We are hoping to get Eurocontrol in sometime after the summer. Is it getting better? Is it getting worse? Is there a way forward?
Okay, there's a couple of different issues. Well, firstly, Eurocontrol is just a collection agency, so all it does, it collects all the ATC fees and distributes them out. The situation is getting marginally better this summer, only because the French haven't engaged thus far in 53 days of ATC strikes. They had 53 days of ATC strikes between February and June of last year. They were protesting at President Macron's pension reforms, which they were exempt from. But secondary striking in France is a national pastime, and therefore the French ATC are the most strike-prone of any. They're allowed to have secondary striking. So even when it's a subsidy that doesn't affect them, they can go on strike. The problem in Europe, and it's one we continue to campaign for, in fact, I've campaigning so aggressive, I've taken a couple of pies in the face outside the Berlaymont over this issue, is trying to persuade Europe that you have a single aviation. What Europe should be doing is when there's a strike, the French use minimum service legislation to protect their domestic local French flights, and they cancel all the overflights. Most other EU countries, most notably Spain, Italy and Greece, protect 100% of the overflights and cancel the local flights. But the French take the opposite view for obvious reasons. And the problem is the geographic centrality of France. So if they shut the skies over France, by the way, we don't need French ATC to allow us to overfly France, but they close the sky. And so we all have to either fly around. There's no capacity to fly around, so we have to cancel. Typically on a French ATC strike day, we have to cancel 600 flights.
And most of them aren't landing in France at all?
All of them are not landing in France. It's flights from Ireland to Italy, from the UK to Spain, from Germany to Portugal, and vice versa, because of the centrality of France. If the European Union, Ursula von der Leyen, took the simple initiative to say, we are going to, by the way, we're not affecting anybody's right to strike. If French air traffic controllers want to go on strike, but we're protecting all the overflights. So French domestic flights will be affected, the French airports will be affected, nobody's right to strike will be impacted in any way, but we're going to protect overflights. And I think that's a perfectly fair and reasonable kind of compromise. The legislation already exists, and the minimum service legislation already exists.
So you're obviously affected by the flights that would have been landing in Charlotte or in Beauvais or whatever, but that's different.
We would take the hit. If we had to cancel all of our flights to Beauvais because French ATC were having a strike, we would take that hit, but at least the flights go. It's very hard to explain to people in Dublin going to Italy or people in Germany going to Portugal why your flight is cancelled because there's a strike in France. It doesn't happen in any other sector. You know, the French can close the peripheric around Paris, but they don't shut all the motorways going. So the trains from Brussels to Spain don't get cancelled when there's a French train strike, but the skies get closed. And I think it is one of the great criticisms I have of the European Union. If they fix the overflights, you would eliminate about 90% of the flight cancellations in Europe every year, and you would eliminate about 80% of the flight delays without in any way compromising or affecting their right to go on strike. Everybody should have the right to go on strike, but if you're going to go on strike, Europe should be protecting the single market for flights and at least protecting the overflights.
And is there any sign from an EU perspective that they're willing to touch this?
None, but there would be a new Parliament and a new Commission, and I would be reasonably, you know, I'm always ever optimistic that a new Parliament and a new Commission might be more willing to at least, I mean, everybody we meet in Brussels, every commissioner, every parliamentarian, yeah, we must fix that. Oh, it's France, you know, the French are like, But, you know, you go back to when they first deregulated air travel, as Senator Cromwell rightly said, you know, I mean, I'm not quite as old as Senator Cromwell, but in my day, when we had to go on rugby tours...
Possibly the oldest person in the room.
When we had to go on rugby tours, we got the boat to Liverpool or to Manchester and it was kind of the most exotic thing in your life when you were 15 and 16, was the bus trip and the ferry across to Manchester.
Via Holyhead, yeah.
Yeah, my 15-year-old went on his rugby tour last year. He had a Ryanair flight to Barcelona for over the Easter weekend. So things have dramatically changed, and the flights to Barcelona were damn sight cheaper than the ferry was to Liverpool in our day. But it's one of the great successes of the European Union. Low-fare air travel has been one of the great successes. One of the reasons the Irish economy has been transformed in the last 20, 30 years, and there is low-cost air access. And that's not just Ryanair. Aer Lingus, to be fair, have responded very good. Like, we do have a world-leading aviation industry here. We just can't keep a world-leading aviation industry if we have this absurd traffic cap at our main airport, where we've just opened a second runway that allows us to grow to 60 million passengers a year.
Okay, and I think, you know, we now have two of our members of the committee have just been elected to the European Parliament, so you'll have two to talk to that have just
sincere congratulations.
left our committee. And I suppose long enough around that I actually did a project on Ryanair when I was in school in 1988, when it was a very small little airline at the time, and it's amazing to see what it has transformed into. But equally, I think it's fair to acknowledge that the deregulation of airlines, where in the past, historically, you could only fly from your home country to other countries, and you could never open a base in any other country other than your home. So Aer Lingus could operate from Ireland, and British Airways could operate from the UK, and Olympic could operate from Greece, and I think that's what probably helped make Ryanair.
And the success of Irish aviation, I mean, there has been successive transport ministers over many years who some I would be critical of, but they have always, we have had a forward-looking aviation policy. We have a forward-looking aviation policy now.
We just need to implement it.
But we just need to implement it.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to let Deputy O'Connor in because he hasn't been in, and then I'll let you back in, Senator Crockwell. Go ahead.
Thanks very much, Chairperson, and I want to welcome Ryanair here and Mr. O'Leary. I wanted to ask just two areas of questioning. The first one was around, there's a very much a geographical argument here around why lifting the cap in Dublin Airport would be damaging for Cork and Shannon. It's an argument that I completely disagree with. I would be on your page here, I think, Mr. O'Leary. But I think somebody of your own success and stature in business should explain to people in areas like Cork and Shannon why lifting the passenger cap is actually going to be a good thing in Dublin Airport for the airports in Cork and Shannon by increasing growth in Dublin, probably because we'd have more aircraft based on the island and the country. And could you give some indication to the public in Cork, where I represent, or for those in Shannon, the regional airports, why doing this is necessary in Dublin for the whole island to benefit? Because there's a very, very lazy argument based on geography, I feel, that doing this is damaging when in fact it's probably not. But could you give a bit of an explanation around that, if it's okay?
I would, yes. Thank you, Deputy. We slightly covered this in some of the previous answers, but I'm happy to set it out again. We submitted a growth plan to the Transport Minister on the 7th of March. It would commit us to growing our traffic on the island of Ireland from 20 million to 30 million passengers over the next 6 years to 2030. We have the aircraft orders that would be able to facilitate that. As part of that, Dublin would grow from 16 million to 20 million passengers, so about 20% growth. Cork will grow from 2 million passengers to 4.5 million, more than 100% growth. Shannon will grow from 1.3 to 3 million, more than 100% growth. The number of based aircraft in Cork will grow from 3 to 7. The based aircraft in Shannon will grow from 3 to 6. But the difficulty is none of that growth is possible unless we can also deliver that growth in Dublin. About between 60 and 65% of our traffic in Dublin is inbound. So it is visitors coming to this country. The competitor for them is not people are sitting abroad. Will I go to Dublin for the weekend or for the stag or my hen or for whatever? Will I go to Shannon and Cork? It's will I go to Dublin or will I go to Glasgow, Edinburgh, Kaunas, Vilnius, Tallinn, Prague. So the competition is not between Dublin, Cork and Shannon. It's getting them on the island of Ireland or losing to Scotland, to the Baltic states or to some other exciting destination in Central and Eastern Europe. We believe if we can continue to grow dramatically in Dublin, we know that, for example, of that 65% of inbound, 10, 15, 20% of those will travel outside of Dublin, will go around the country playing golf, visiting Wild Atlantic Way, which has been incredibly successful development. I'd like to think it was pioneered by a Ryanair executive when he was chairman of Fáilte Ireland. We can get, as long as we get more people on the island, we can build outbound traffic. You can come into Dublin and go out from Cork or Shannon, and we might be able to also bring new routes into Cork and Shannon, and you can go back out of Dublin. So we need to have growth overall in the overall architecture. It is not a question of can we grow in Dublin, well, why don't you just move them to Cork and Shannon? Because 65% don't want to go to Cork and Shannon. We can encourage more of them to use Cork and Shannon, but only if we can get them into Dublin first. And that if you don't, and you cap Dublin Airport, we've already, as Jason said out earlier today, three aircraft planned to go in Dublin this summer, 16 new routes planned, and all of those aircraft and those new routes have now gone to southern Italy and Poland. For no reason other than the IAA, we couldn't get additional slots to base those aircraft here. And we want to base more aircraft here in Dublin and in Cork and in Shannon. We think Ireland can continue to grow on an all-Ireland basis, but you can't do that unless we can have growth at Dublin Airport as well. And disappointingly, we made that submission to the Transport Minister on the 7th of March, and we still haven't had a reply from him 2.5 months later.
Very good. I was actually going to come on to that. Overall, what has the engagement with Minister Ryan been like in terms of the output? You had the famous meeting. We know the two of you had a very interesting exchange of view. We were all engrossed in that. But overall, his performance as Minister for Transport, how has it been in your view?
Look, that's one more for the electorate. Look, I think the Minister has been Minister for Transport. It is a difficult portfolio. He is Minister for Transport, I think, for communications and for energy. I think his interests lie elsewhere other than in transport, and therefore transport isn't a high priority there. But, you know, we have over many years dealt with ministers of different hues. I think he could do more to resolve these transport issues. He certainly needs, but I would not blame just him alone. He and the government need to take action on the traffic cap at Dublin Airport. We need an interim solution while the planning process is playing its way out. But this planning application is going to take 3 or 4 years to resolve. I have no doubt that the cap will be lifted. But lifting a cap from 32 million to 40 million is not the future, as the Cathaoirleach rightly pointed out. If you lift the cap from 32 to 40 million, we'll be at 40 million within about 2 years. And we'll be back again. We need no cap. We have 2 runways at Dublin Airport. We have runway and terminal capacity for about 60 million passengers, and that would take 10 or 15 years worth of 20 years of growth, and we don't have to worry about planning. We do have to be sensitive to noise issues. This growth will take place on new, much quieter aircraft. Dublin Airport needs to do more to bring the local residents with it, but we will create many thousands of new jobs at Dublin Airport and many more residents and voters in the Fingal constituency as a result as well. So there's lots of upside. But we should not be dealing with a planning issue when we already have a planning approval for an infrastructure that allows the airport to grow to 60 million passengers.
Thanks very much. On the planning issue, obviously it's quite interesting here that there is no segregation in our system here to identify what's a project that is incredibly important in terms of the national economic interests, such as Dublin Airport. We know it's worth billions upon billions to the economy here, but yet the planning perspective is handled at a local authority level. And it's the same for all other airports, by the way. I'm not just singling out Dublin, but obviously because it is such a dominant force from a traffic point of view. What would you do differently if you were to sit down and say to yourself, what is in the interest of growing the aviation economy here, passenger traffic in Dublin Airport, around this sector in general? What would you do differently?
I have no doubt about it, not just the aviation sector. As a country, as a nation, we need a much more efficient planning. We need a streamlined, most countries have a streamlined planning process for nationally important infrastructure. We have to, and nationally important infrastructure would include airports, power generation, and I mean, I think it's a disgrace that we didn't go ahead with the liquid natural gas facility in Shannon. I mean, we have no energy policy in this country. Our energy policy consists of importing gas from the UK and electricity from France. And when something goes wrong in the UK or France, we're going to be the first people to be cut off. And what are we going to do? We have no backup natural gas. We don't have natural resource ourselves. There's lots of plans for having windmills in 2050 and solar, but it's all manana in 20 years' time. So I think we need to expedite. I mean, the Children's Hospital has been an example of how not to develop important infrastructure. It's located in the wrong place. It is about 120,000 square feet, and they have spent about $2 billion building it. We built an office building at Airside, 120,000 square feet. Now, it's a big square box, which is the way all hospitals in America are built. We spent $20 million building it. Like, you know, unless we find ways as a country of expediting. I mean, one of my great bugbears at the moment is traffic in, and Dublin is now the second most congested city in Europe. The M50 is a car park, and I am a daily commuter up and down the M4 on the M50. We should be working now on an M75 that links Drogheda around to Navan, around to Kinnegad down. Because if we're building all the houses now outside the M50, and we are telling our citizens you can buy affordable housing in Kildare, Westmeath, Meath, Louth, Wicklow, but you can't get in and out of Dublin in the morning, or unless it is, you must use public transport. It doesn't exist. And yet we are not, if we don't start now to build an outer ring road around the M50, traffic is going to become an increasing burden. The amount of cars, that the Port Tunnel works great, but you know, we need to get the heavy goods vehicles out off the M50, because increasingly Dublin commuters are going to be using the M50 and the other arterial roads. I would also be scrapping a huge amount of the useless cycle lanes that have been developed around Dublin in the last 5 years. I have yet to find a cyclist in most of them, certainly not out along the Rock Road or anywhere else. I think cyclists are a much underappreciated body of men and women, but like, frankly, this is we are not going to have a functioning city here in the next 10 or 20 years unless we find ways. I know there's an environmental argument. The car fleet is going to electrify in the early 2050s, but we need to be creating car parking in the centre of Dublin for these cars, because it is the only way citizens who are buying houses outside the M50 are going to be able to get in and out of this town.
Finally, do you think aviation emissions get an unfair rap? I was on radio debating this recently, a couple of months back, and I made the point I think it's under 3% emissions, but do you think they get an unfair rap in the Irish media?
I don't think they get an unfair map in the Irish media. I just think there's great ignorance in the Irish media. In fact, you're correct, although the figure is 2.4%. Emissions, aviation accounts for 2.4% of EU emissions. Marine transport accounts for 5% of Europe's CO2 emissions. But when Sky News or George Lee wants to show the globe warming up, there's no point in putting a picture of a ferry pulling out of Dunleary. It's always an aircraft taking off, and you can see, oh, look, there's the globe warming up behind the aircraft. Aviation accounts for 2.4% of Europe's CO2 emissions. We should pay a fair and reasonable environmental tax. The problem I have with environmental taxes on aviation is that long-haul flights to and from Europe accounts for 53% of that 2.4%, and we completely exempt them from environmental taxes. So the people who create the majority of the emissions are completely exempt. The minority are created by European short-haul flights, and by the way, they should pay their fair share. I don't have a problem with that, but it should be a fair share. we're asking European citizens, and if you live on the periphery of Europe, say, if you live in Ireland, we don't have a train alternative, we don't have a cycling alternative to get us to Brussels, we have to fly. But we should pay our fair share. I just think that fair share should be extended to long-haul flights as well. So it doesn't get an unfair rap, it just gets a lot of ill-advised coverage on a lot of the media. But, you know, we do consume carbon. There is no way we're going to electrify aviation this side of 2050. There's no propulsion system that's going to get an aircraft up in the air. But we're spending 20 billion on a fleet of new aircraft that will be coming. The first deliveries in 2017. Those aircraft carry 20% more passengers, they burn 20% less fuel, and they are 50% quieter than even our existing fleet. I mean, the problem very shortly in and around Dublin Airport is people won't be able to sleep because it'll be too quiet. They'll have forgotten what the sound of an aircraft overhead between the hours of 7 a.m. and 11 p.m. sound like. And thank you, David Conn, for your support. I know you've been a great supporter of Cork Airport, and we are continuing to grow strongly down in Cork Airport with the support of you and other Cork deputies.
2 extra aircraft in Cork.
Just to point out that the last ferry from Dún Laoghaire was in 2015, and I think it was probably fair to say that Ryanair was probably the cause of the demise of the ferry. When you could get a plane to Liverpool for $9.99, why would you be going to Holyhead? So I'm sure we'll get George Lee to do one from Dublin Port at some stage, though. Senator Crockwell, you'd like to come back in?
I would indeed. Firstly, I'd like to compliment your father, who apparently travelled on business class to London, but made sure that you travelled with the great unwashed on a ferry. Good, probably gave you the grounding you have today. OK, so you accept the noise issue in Dublin Airport is a DAA problem. I went out to a house in St Margaret's, 4:30 in the morning. I stood in the sitting room of that house chatting to a few people. Councillor Joe Newman, I think, was the one who brought me out there. And we'd be chatting away, and the next thing an aircraft would take off and we couldn't hear each other in the room. I think it was more long-haul than short-haul aircraft that were causing the serious noise. I may be wrong on that. But it did strike me that these people have tried to negotiate and work with Dublin Airport Authority and have not been successful. The issue of slots, Mr. O'Leary, I'm ignorant on this, so forgive me. When Aer Lingus was being sold off, there was a big question about the slots that were guaranteed in Heathrow, right? You mentioned that you have to negotiate slots with the IAA on an annual basis. Is that all slots, or do you have a number of regular slots assigned to you?
If I can come back on those, I'm very grateful for my father sending me on by the boat on the rugby tours. Unfortunately, he set up, I think, set up and lost 2 businesses. So he might have been better spent less time in the business lounges in Aer Lingus back in the 60s and 70s.
Nothing wrong with losing a business.
No, most of my learnings were from the failures, not from the. You learn much more as did he from the failures rather than the successes.
Same in politics, I think.
Pardon me?
Same in politics, I think.
Well, that's probably true. Look. The noise at Dublin Airport is an issue for all of us. And it is easy for me to be flippant. Dublin Airport was opened in 1939. Anybody who has bought a house, and this is the easy answer, knew there was an airport there. But what is not, I think, fairly covered is the amount of investment that the dramatic reductions in noise that aircraft today, new engines, new aircraft, are dramatically reducing noise. And we have videos up on our website, and those numbers are correct. But the decibel levels in St Margaret's and Ballybottle and these places, when an aircraft is overhead, is about somewhere between 53 and 55 decibels. And O'Connell Street Bridge is 72 decibels. So I would never say there isn't a noise issue. Certainly Dublin Airport needs to do more on housing insulation, but what is not covered fairly, I was furious. RTE did the usual rubbishy coverage of this about 6 months ago, interviewing some teary-eyed lady in her house. The children couldn't sleep. It wasn't because there are no flights taking off between, I think it's midnight and 7 a.m. in the morning. If you were standing, I'm surprised anybody let 2 politicians into their living room at 4:30 in the morning. But if that was, it might have been a transatlantic aircraft landing. And that would be unusual. And to be fair, even those aircraft are dramatically quieter than they were now. But having 2 runways instead of 1, using 2 runways at least reduces the number of movements over anybody's individual property by 50%, and those movements are taking place on dramatically quieter aircraft. But we, and I don't think, the DAA has more to do on insulation and other measures. We as the airlines need to invest more money in improving the noise performance of our aircraft. But we also need to push back against, and I say this with some trepidation, some of the NIMBYs out there who, no matter what you do, are never going to be happy. Like, that is a factually correct. There was 26,000 complaints to noise, I think in 2022 or 2023, and 24,200 came from one individual. You know, thank you very much, but go away. There are challenges, and we all need to address the noise issue. We have to be a good neighbour. If we want to grow Dublin Airport, and we do, we have to be a good neighbour for the people who live around Dublin Airport. But when people are being unreasonable and making unreasonable complaints, I mean, one of the ones that RT, they featured some national school, you know, and the noise over the playground was dreadful. Well, we went out and measured the noise over that playground when an aircraft was overhead was 58 decibels. And with the greatest respect, kids are only in school from about 9:30 until about 4 o'clock in the afternoon, you know, and they're out in the playground. They're not suffering oral damage, but we still need to invest in more in aircraft that will reduce those. Just on the slots issue, we have to. There are 2 issues here. You have slot-constrained airports like Heathrow and Gatwick, where you hold those slots every year, and if you're the holder of those slots, you have those historic rights. They're not growing, so you're not applying, but you still have to apply for the slots every year. And occasionally an airline might lease or transfer a slot to somebody else, and that has to go into the process. That's not where we are. When Aer Lingus was sold to, I think, to IAG, there was a protection, and the government rightly put in protections on the Heathrow slots and also the Gatwick slots. But IAG has now taken the Gatwick slots. Aer Lingus no longer fly to Gatwick, and those Gatwick slots have been used for something else. What we're talking about here, though, in Ireland, at Dublin and Cork and Shannon, and again, come in, correct me if I'm wrong, we file our winter and our summer schedules. We are entitled to the historic slots. Sorry, go ahead. Okay, we're entitled to the historic slots. But we can't get the extra slots now that we need for the winter extras.
So yeah, correct. We file twice a year, summer and winter slots. You file each individually. Last winter, we would have operated 6.4 million of historic seats in Dublin. We got all of those back this year. What we didn't get was the extra 500,000 seats we operated on ad hoc slots, which is 260,000 extra seats at Christmas, the extras across midterms, etc. The IAA haven't approved those this year, nor will they.
Even though they were historic. But because we're above the cap, the IAA is now coming under pressure. Reduce flights. And the problem is it's a calendar cap, and so the pressure comes on at Christmas. Okay. They let additional flights in here in the summer, and now we have to cut the Christmas flights because there was more growth in the summer. Oh, we need to get it back under 32 million.
Now, the other thing, you threw the elephant out in the middle of the room when you adverted to the Minister and the Minister's responsibilities. You know, we have a Minister for Transport, Climate Change, Communications, Environment, and anything else you're having yourself. No organisation would have one individual trying to run so many different. And indeed, I have a letter from Minister Ryan and his junior minister at the time, where we were speaking on the search and rescue negotiations that was taking place, where they openly admitted they have no oversight of transport, and they trust the officials to do it. That is a serious problem, and I think that's a societal problem for Ireland. Having ministers with 5 or 6 portfolios, it just doesn't work. The last one I want to ask you is, it's not unusual in Europe, and indeed I think Aldergrove in Northern Ireland shared the airport, civilian and military. Just a real sideball here, do you see any potential to look at Baldonnel as an alternative to Dublin?
Briefly, no, it's not, because the runway is too short, and but Baldonnel would be a very useful. I mean, one of the ways you could create additional space at Dublin Airport would you move the private aircraft to Baldonnel. It would Baldonnel, because it's close to the M50, would be equally accessible. So you could move the Microsoft private jet and all the other American private jets could readily move there.
Could cargo go there?
Pardon me? Cargo can't. It hasn't got the capacity. It's quite it's a shortish runway and it hasn't got much facilities. But you could certainly. But that's not ultimately a solution. Tony Ryan back in the day had this idea. We would buy and private and build and grow it. But it was never really a viable solution. And it is there. It might. I mean, I think and. Certainly our Air Force would be better off, and the government. I mean, I do think it's a disgrace, but I understand the political reality of the government. This government should have 2 or 3 private jets. I think it's a disgrace. We do not send ministers or our Taoiseach around when he's going to European summits. He's not arriving on some kind of state aircraft. And this messing around or leasing in aircraft, we are wasting lots of taxpayers' money, and we should grow up. And if the if the Taoiseach or the Taoiseach need to get somewhere to a meeting, the use of the time saving on a private jet would be more than justified. And this idea that for political we don't want to be seen getting on a private jet is a nonsense. And we've a couple of old tatty Lear jets that are always breaking down. The government should go and spend 20 or 30 million, buy a proper private jet. And if the Taoiseach or the Taoiseach need to go to meetings, then that's what we should use it for. And the military and the Air Force will operate all that. I think one of the biggest challenges, but just to come back on the other issue, if you look at, one of the challenges facing this country over the next decade, our population is going to grow from 5 to 6 million. There is net immigration of something of 100,000 a year. We have a strong economy. And if we don't have net inward immigration, we will not have people to staff our hospitals, to do many of the labour jobs, agricultural jobs. And, if you start now and say that in 2035 or 2040, the population of this country is going to be 6.5 million people, what do we need to do? We need to build more housing. To be fair, and, I'm not in a political sense, the government is getting on top of the housing. But what they're not getting on top of, we're building all the housing outside the M50. How are they going to get in and out of town? There is objections to petrol cars and diesel cars for the emissions, but by the early 2030s, most of the car fleet will be electric. But we are strangling Dublin with cycle lanes and artificial sort of nonsensical restrictions on car movements. What we should be doing is building car parks in the centre of town for these electrified cars so that people can move easily in and out of the centre of our city. We should be planning now for a motorway around the M50 and M75. And we should be putting in place that kind of infrastructure. And Dublin Airport is part of that. We will have 50 million passengers a year at Dublin Airport by about 2035 or 2040. We will have a booming tourism industry. We will have Swords will be a much bigger, wealthier town and community because Dublin Airport will continue to be the engine of that. And all of that needs to be done in an environmentally sustainable and noise efficient way. But we're not, and I think the problem is we have a Minister for Transport. We should have a Minister for Infrastructure in the next government. It should be somebody, we do not plan well the next 10 years. The location of the Children's Hospital is a disgrace. It should be on the M50. The way we have burned through 2 and 3 billion quid building what is a reasonably straightforward children's hospital is a disgrace because we don't do infrastructure properly. And instead of having a kind of a ministry of transport, communications, whatever else you're having yourself, we should have a ministry for infrastructure that sets out 10-year plans, 15-year plans, making assumptions on what our population will be and how we get from here to there over that 10 or 15 year. And then we wouldn't have issues like the DAA or the badly designed and ridiculously delivered children's hospital. I would hope we would have much more effective delivery of infrastructure. But we don't do infrastructure well because we don't focus on infrastructure. It gets divided between 5 or 6 different departments.
Okay. I think you'll find that
Senator Cockell, I just want to let Senator...
Just finish on this.
Deputy Smith has to go and vote. I just want to let him in.
Sorry.
I'll let you back in.
No, I'm not coming back in.
Just a couple of things. The cycle lanes aren't strangling Dublin. It's cars. As someone who famously bought a taxi licence years ago when Dublin wasn't as congested, you know that it's cars. There has to be better traffic management systems across public transport and private car use and cycle lanes and all the rest, but come on. I actually checked out that video because I was intrigued by it, but I'd actually seen it before. I didn't think that was the one you were referring to in terms of the aircraft noise. Aircraft noise monitoring is a sophisticated scientific endeavour. The WHO, has acknowledged, based on huge research, the health impacts, physical health impacts of aircraft noise. The technology that you used, I don't think is very credible. It's just short of buying that noise monitor in Smith's Toy Store. That's, but again, it's not your role as an airline to monitor aircraft noise. I mean, you have a responsibility to modernise and improve your aircraft fleet as per the technology that's out there, and you're doing that. I mean, again, this is the role of the DAA or indeed the aircraft ANCA. So I accept that. But by wading into the debate with a video such as that, I don't think is helpful. So I'll just say that. But I did have a question on sustainable aviation fuel, because when you were here last, and I agree with you on the ETS, by the way, which, there needs to be a fair share in terms of how that is being shared out. And I think that's something that's not being discussed enough. And I think the last time we were in, the last interaction we had was in relation to trade union recognition, which was actually, you were saying, and now I'm agreeing, you're saying fair share.
We've accepted the wisdom of your position.
Yeah, so I'm questioning loads of things now. But
I don't know whether you're going in his direction.
Yeah, this is going to keep me up nights. But no, we do need a fair distribution of the ETS. I think that's something that absolutely needs to be on the level. But sustainable aviation fuel, if you could just give me 30 seconds on that in terms of your investment in Trinity, where it's going and where we are. Sorry for the rush.
A couple of things. So, I may come back on the first one. Sorry, can I disagree with you fundamentally? If you go around Stephen's Green, it is not the cars that are the problem. There is one lane for cars going around Stephen's Green. When I was going to college, admittedly, as my children say, that was the last bloody century. In the early 1980s, there was 4 lanes of traffic going around Stephen's Green. There's now 1 lane and 1 lane of bicycles. And there is not that many bicycles in the bicycle lane. I went out the Rock Road to the Blackrock Clinic. There's 1 lane of traffic on one of the main arteries in and out of Dublin, and there's 1 bicycle lane with not a bicycle in it. We have to create, there is no way we are going to have a livable city here in 20 years' time when we're building all the houses outside the M50 and we're expecting people to commute in and out. Public transport won't serve those diverse communities across. They will from Maynooth and Kildare, and there will be some lines that will be served. But ultimately, if we don't make it easy and affordable for people to drive in and out of town, and that is more traffic lanes, less cycle lanes, but certainly much more car parking. And I would be using, like, if you look at the Quays in my day used to be 4, there was 4 lanes, well, 1 was car parking and 3 lanes of traffic. They're now down to 1 lane of traffic, 2 taxi lanes, which I'm very grateful for because I get to fly up and down the Quays on a taxi lane, and there's 1 bicycle lane. The functioning lungs of Dublin are the Quays, Stephen's Green, and that is, we need to loosen and to make those work because they don't work at the moment. Can I come back to you on SAFs? We have a huge problem here. We have already signed up supply agreements on SAFs for about 10% of our fuel needs by 2030. We've set a target for ourselves to get to about 12.5%. The European mandate is 6%. Ireland has no SAFs. Yeah. And Ireland is the beneficiary of about 250 million euros a year in what we call in ETS tax revenues that is returned to the Irish government. It's one of the issues, and I've given a copy of the submission to the committee in my growth letter to Minister Ryan. We pointed out that Dublin, in Ireland in 2023, received 163 million of ETS revenues, essentially mainly from Ryanair passengers. That's going to grow to 240 million in 2024. We use that income, wrongly in my view, to subsidise and fund the school bus fleet. Now, I have no issue with the school bus fleet, but that's the Department of Education budget. We should be using those ETS tax, and I've asked Minister Ryan, why are you not using that ETS revenue to incentivise and, if needs be, subsidise the oil majors, who are the only people who will produce those SAFs here in Ireland? He's focused on storing SAFs in Shannon. There's apparently 3 big tanks under the runway in Shannon Airport. They're no good to us in Shannon Airport. We need to have SAFs at Dublin Airport, Cork Airport, Shannon Airport, and the only way that is going to be, it is being subsidised and incentivised by the Dutch government, the Austrian government, the German government, the French government. The Irish government is one of the few European governments that is not incentivising the production of SAFs here in Ireland. And unless we start doing that, we will have no SAFs in Ireland in 2030, when we and the other airlines would want to buy and uplift SAFs here in Ireland. And again, it's another gap in our failure of transport policy under Minister Ryan. It's an issue that I think he should be on top of, because, you know, the Greens love talking about SAFs, but when it comes to actually delivering SAFs in this country, they have no policy at all.
Don't like talking about planes at all.
No. Thank you, Deputy.
That's true. Yeah.
You done?
Thank you.
Sorry, one thing on the SAF, like the DA plan to spend 3.1 billion over the next 4 years, which is a 45% increase. They have, of the 3.1 billion, they have devoted the grand total of 1.7 million to SAF, to a development plan for SAF and research for hydrogen fuels. DA have no plan for SAF. Okay. And they're not devoting any of this excessive capex on it.
The DA. Okay. That's good.
You done?
Yeah, absolutely.
Just very, very briefly, and then we'll let you go. Tourism. The Minister for Tourism is also Green Minister. Have you had any contact with her in terms of you can't bring the 65% of inbound passengers in because the planes can't land because you're not getting a slot because of the cap?
No, I mean,
any engagement with her?
No, we've had no engagement. To be fair, we haven't requested a meeting with the tourism minister. She's been busy on other issues, RTE, etc.
They're in the room next door at the moment, but anyway.
Yeah, no, but I mean, to be fair, there are enough tourism agencies between Fáilte Ireland and the others. The ITIC, who are the transport, the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation, the Hotels Federation, they tend to do, I mean, they're all on side. Everybody thinks the cap is insane. But I mean, our focus is on, and what we've tried to be, and I'll give you the letter that we sent to Minister Ryan on the 7th of March. Yeah, we've tried to be positive. It's not just lift the cap, this cap is stupid, but it's lift the cap and allow us, we will guarantee you 50% traffic growth over the next 5 or 6 years, which would fill all the hotels and the restaurants and the boats and create enormous new employment here in Ireland. And I find it very deeply disappointing that, having given Minister Ryan that proposal, 2.5 months later, Minister Ryan hasn't lifted a finger, hasn't replied, hasn't done anything at all. We did get some letter from Jack Chambers, but it didn't say anything. But it was pretty much, we acknowledge your letter and we're looking at it. I mean, if we make a submission, we're Europe's largest airline. We make a big submission to our transport minister. We expect action, and we would expect a reply. I don't know if any other multinational came to Ireland and promised to invest in this case. Basing another 16 aircraft would be 2 billion of additional investment and creating about another 7,500 jobs. You'd be straight up to Farmley or wherever it is government operates these days. And I think we suffer sometimes because we're Irish, and there's an assumption, it's just Ryanair. We should, and government should, have a more focused approach on capturing this growth, because it's being lost to other EU countries at the moment.
In terms of just one point, there was one point in one of the documents you sent us about the Dublin Airport environmental subsidy scheme or something, that there's some kind of scheme that is supposed to incentivise people to bring the new aircraft, but you're quite critical of that scheme.
We are, as have the...
Why?
Yeah, the IAA...
I don't know the scheme, so maybe you explain it to us.
Well, I won't explain the time, but basically the scheme is you should have lower charges for more environmentally efficient aircraft like ours. The way the DAA have implemented the scheme, you'll have more. It actually penalises our more environmentally efficient aircraft. The IAA have actually intervened in this about a month ago and said to the DAA, go back and revise this. Okay. Your environmental modulation scheme doesn't work. It's penalising greener aircraft and incentivising older aircraft. Like, it's insane. Have you any more detail on that?
No, last year we took out all 19 of our newest A200 aircraft, precisely because they don't have an environmental scheme. There are no incentives. Despite what the DA has said to you, there are no environmental charges in Dublin. So all of our newest aircraft moved out of Dublin precisely because other European airports are actually incentivising next-gen aircraft. So we moved them where the costs are lowest. The IAA, 3 weeks ago, came out told the GAA, your scheme is not fit for purpose, please relook at it, and they have to reply to the IAA within the next 4 weeks or thereabouts.
I think as a committee we actually visited Amsterdam and Rotterdam airports, and we went with Ryanair on one of the new generation. I didn't really, so presumably some of them are still coming in from other bases.
Correct, but
they're not
based here.
Yeah.
And that's a significant, there is a noise penalty now, it's modest, but there is a noise penalty for residents around the airport. It's another, and I Deputy Smith rightly said, you know, the DAA continuously mismanage not just their airport customers, but the neighbouring community. The fact that they're not incentivising us to, and Aer Lingus, to put in the quieter aircraft here in Dublin, even from a kind of community sort of, as a community incentive or being a better neighbour for residents who live around the airport. It just goes to show the disconnect there is. But the DA won't fix the car parks either. You know, we're full, sorry, nothing we can do about it. And I would be very critical of the DA management in that respect, you know, and...
Have you any questions you'd like us to put to Kenny Jacobs next week, other than what the 250 million tunnel is for?
Yes, what's the health and safety issue with parcels going across the taxiway? Secondly, why have you not spent the last 12 months this winter opening up more temporary car parking space, particularly to relieve the pressure on car parking during the peak summer months? And three, why do you not have an environmental incentive that encourages airlines to use quieter, more fuel-efficient aircraft? Why have the IAA said that your environmental incentive isn't fit for purpose? Please go back and revise it again.
Okay, that'll get us going next week. I suppose at this point, unless you have anything else, Deputy Smith, we could probably talk for another couple of hours, but I think we've covered a lot of points. I want to thank you for coming in, because I thought it was...
Sorry, go ahead.
No, just very important that we would hear from you. We, again, as the biggest airline in Dublin Airport, which obviously we all know, but you're a very significant part of the airport, and it's equally the same. We asked Aer Lingus to come in, who are not as big as you, but are still quite big. I'm just wondering, on the flights, you have the 33 aircraft based here now, but presumably there's lots of other Ryanair planes coming in from other bases into Dublin. Is there an analysis of, is it 75% kind of based in Dublin traffic, or is 25% coming from other bases in Dublin? Or has anyone ever even looked at those figures? Or
Roughly.
So effectively, yeah, and effectively, if you're on Buzz or Air Malta or Lauda slightly different because of the A320, but it's exactly the same, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's exactly the same inside, and it's the same service and the same everything, and they're all Ryanair codes. It's just slightly different uniforms and possibly slightly different paint on the outside.
Correct.
And again, just to thank you for what Ryanair does for Irish people, but also for Irish tourists, people coming to Ireland. It makes an enormous contribution, and I know that people in Poland and Italy and Spain and Portugal and all these other countries would benefit from Ryanair. We sometimes forget how big it is, a little bit like the old days. Smurfit was an awful lot bigger outside Ireland than it is in Ireland. I think, is Dublin about 7% of the Ryanair business? Or?
Yeah, Ireland is about 8% in total, so Dublin, Cork and Shannon.
Yeah, so there's a massive amount of stuff happening that we don't see an awful lot of, unless we're on the runway. And we visited Seville as a committee last year, and we could see you're the biggest airline in that app.
I think Ireland gets a lot of credit, you know, when they see Ryanair aircraft. Oh, that's the Irish airline. I mean, it is one of our more successful exports. It used to be Guinness, now it's Ryanair.
So to thank you just all for being here and for giving up your time. We got a lot of insight out of it, and we will take up the issues with the DAA next week, and indeed with Minister Ryan in the weeks after. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And can I just say, we will follow up with an invitation to the committee to come out and visit the training centre in Swords or in Santry, and the airside building in Swords.
Lovely. Thank you very much. So now this meeting is now adjourned. The next meeting of the Joint Committee will be a public meeting with the Dublin Airport Authority on 19th of June at 1:15 p.m. Thank you all very much.